We had planned on going to a massive amusement park just outside of town. A fun little trip to celebrate Tim and Jasmine's recent engagement. But the old gas station attendant's words, his cryptic warning, were oddly enticing. And we decided to instead explore the alleged mystical place, the mirage-like forest of All and Ever. Beware the ephemeral forest of All and Ever. From the black boughs of its tightened trees peer down imps and incubi of madness, while demonian insects, invisible to the eyes of mortal men, cling to its glass-armored bales. The frost-draped ruins and relics of an ancient and unremembered kingdom to which it owes its name can be found in crumbled and half-sunken states throughout, though the portals and recesses that remain may harbor more than shadow and dust. Tread not upon the time-resistant flagstones. Enter not the lightless halls with their stagnant air of countless cycles. Rest not beneath the teetering porticos. Stand not upon the perilous slanting balconies. There is more than the danger of ruin amidst the aged and derelict structures. More than a weird cold haunts that fleeting region, which only appears but briefly every few centuries to the north of town, northeast of this very gas station. For what seemed like miles in every direction, there was only the weird crystalline coating over everything. Not a single blade of grass had been spared the blasting of the oddly bluish glaze. No petal remained unburdened by the semi-transparent and frost-like calification. The ground, where it was traversable, was slick, and we had to carefully mount certain structures or briefly slide down others. The air even seemed thick with crystals. The atmosphere, somehow both humid, stuffy, and cold, glittered softly in the ever-present light. There was no sun or moon that we could see above the glazed canopy of trees, and yet there was light. There weren't any of the usual smells you'd normally find in the woods or forest. There was only the paradoxically muggy and chilled air. Finally, after what seemed like hours of carefully walking, climbing, and mantling, we came upon a courtyard, or what would have been a courtyard in some former pre-ruined time, but now it was glazed over, lustrous, but in an eerie, almost dismal way. There was a fairly large stone gazebo in the center, and while I'm sure it had probably looked nice, perhaps even elegant, in some earlier state, in that moment it looked crudely structured, covered as it was with sheets of crystal glaze. Stalactites of varying lengths hung at random from the edge of its domed ceiling, and a high-backed chair, proportioned for a figure much larger than that of a human, sat within, its seat empty. The stonework of both the gazebo and the flagstones of the courtyard were impressive, had been laid with immaculate care, and yet, intermittently throughout, clusters of crystals had forcibly peeked through like invasive weeds. It was a depressing scene to see such an antique beauty so totally overtaken by the strange growths. Tim and Jasmine had been rendered speechless by the darkly fantastical forest sometime earlier in our unforeseen trek, but now, seeing this first sign of civilization, albeit ancient, they both spoke up. Tim wondered aloud at the origin of the structure, while Jasmine directly asked me if I recognized the historical handiwork. I casually studied a few ancient civilizations, but didn't recognize the architecture, couldn't place it within any specific culture. The columns supporting the gazebo's hexagonal roof were thick, and broadly petaled vines had been sculpted around them, giving the appearance of the pillars being naturally overgrown. The crystal glaze had simply been an unforeseen step further in this direction. The structure's builders had been master craftsmen, artisans, and it pained me to see their work so horribly defaced. Despite the craftsmanship and decor of the gazebo, the chair within was fairly simple. Plain in its construction and design, you would have thought that it had been placed there by someone, if it weren't for the fact that it was clearly cemented to the gazebo's floor, and not by the glaze, which had somehow been kept from the gazebo's interior. The chair was a fundamental fixture of the overall structure, even though we had taken great pains to avoid direct, or at least sustained, contact with anyone in the forest. Tim entered the gazebo and sat down in the chair. For a moment, no one said anything, and then Tim, after exhaling, said that he felt fine. That the chair was, despite its appearance, fairly comfortable. We'd been walking for a while, so I assumed the comfort he found was owed more to the basic physical relief than the rigid seat itself. We waited around for a while, unsure of what to do, while outside the courtyard, the ostensibly lifeless forest carried on a funeral ambience of soft winds and trembling crystals. Eventually, Tim got up and motioned for Jasmine to have a seat, and she did so eagerly, despite her early aversion to coming anywhere near the structure. I leaned up against the gazebo's railing, careful not to let my bare arms come into contact with its glazed shell. Jasmine settled into the chair as best she could and tossed her head back. When her eyes met the ceiling, she went rigid, and her mouth dropped open. My gaze followed hers, and Tim's presumably did as well, because he softly said, "Shit." Hanging from the ceiling of the gazebo, extending waist down from the stonework, was some kind of knight. Inhumanly broad shoulders, armored from head to waist in black iron, and in his gloved hands, frozen mid-draw, was a massive bow aimed directly at the seat, at Jasmine. The figure's head was covered by a helmet, but through the faceplate its eyes could be seen, spectrally radiant with a crimson luster. Viewed from an angle, I could see the light of its eyes through the thin slit in the faceplate, but from Jasmine's position, she saw them full on, and was thus transfixed by them. Tim and I weren't made aware that she had been trying to move until I saw her temple became damp with sweat, despite the considerable chill that pervaded the courtyard. Tim rushed over, shouting Jasmine's name, and I scrambled to find something, a dislodged stone or box or some other weighty object, for a reason my mind didn't immediately make me aware of until I saw Tim fail to remove Jasmine from the seat. Then, putting two and two together, my eyes flashed to the bow, to the deadly stone arrow knocked therein, and to the drawstring that was threateningly taut. I knew that the arrow would be loosed, that its baseball-sized head would find a target at the top of Jasmine's skull. I then took in the full scene, the debris beneath the chair, which I had initially regarded as mere dust fallen from the ceiling for the countless cycles, but now with my mind finally comprehending, I realized that the dust had most likely come from someone, that it was probably the time-molded remains of the chair's previous occupant. Things happened very fast after that. Tim, who'd been my best friend for years, provided himself to be not just a great friend, but a great fiancé as well. He unshouldered his pack and handed it to me, telling me as he did so that I needed the food and water to make it back, and that I would make it back, and that he was thankful for all the time we'd spent together over the years. Then, before I could argue, he stepped in front of the ceiling-hung archer and looked directly into its smoldering eyes. And just as Jasmine had been, he was immediately frozen in place by the spectral and Medusian gaze of the archer. What I hadn't expected was for Jasmine to be released from the spell. I don't think Tim had either. I think he had planned on dying with Jasmine because it was plainly obvious that the power of the massive bow would send its stone arrow clear through him. The intent behind his self-sacrifice had been to somewhat lessen Jasmine's own terror by allowing her to at least die with someone else, with the one she loved. But now, with her fortuitously released, Tim would die alone. Once freed, Jasmine quickly leapt up from her seat, her eyes closed. She would have run right into the rim of the gazebo in her panicked flight if I hadn't steered her clear of it at the last moment. Cradling her, I tried to think of something to say, of any words I could offer that would ease her mounting grief and panic, but I couldn't think of anything and instead led her away from the gazebo and her sorcerously immobilized fiancé. Just when I had sat her down at the edge of a nearby crumbling fountain, in the middle of what would have been a structure of somewhat massive, unnameable, spider-like creature, I heard a sound, soft though profound in its dire suggestion. Turning around, my eyes immediately went to the archer, and my heart plummeted into my stomach at what I saw. The arrow had been loosened from the great bow, with traveling downward at an impossibly slow speed towards Tim's upraised head. Tears swelled in my eyes at realizing that the stone arrow would strike at the very center of his forehead. I ran over to him, knowing that there was nothing I could do, but wanting to try anyway, and upon drawing near I saw the terror mounting in his eyes. Straining his frozen face, he was still sentient, still aware, and the sight of that fearsome arrow suspended by some dark magic in the air before him must have been absolutely terrifying. I was literally able to track the arrow's flight. It was moving so slowly, perhaps a fourth of an inch every second. Against my nerves, I reached out to grasp the arrow's shaft, and while there was no pain or discomfort from the contact, the sensation was nonetheless unsettling. Feeling my hand being guided along by the gravity-defying arrow, assuming that there'd be no harm in trying, I gripped the shaft tightly and tried to stop its progress, but it continued on despite my efforts. Next, I tried to alter its path, to shove it one direction, and when that failed to produce results, pull it the other way. But I was either too weak or the arrow's flight path was simply unalterable, had maybe been predestined to strike true. Finally accepting the futility of my efforts, I let go of the arrow and resumed my previous search for something to intercept the arrow with, whilst ignoring the thoughts in my head that arose in regards to the arrow's preternaturally persistent movement and kinetic energy, which the disheartening voice said would surely allow it to push or even pass through anything I put before it. I found a single object, a flagstone that had been dislodged in some geological event, probably centuries before our arrival. It was heavy, surprisingly so, and I had to awkwardly waddle with it against my stomach, costing myself valuable time. Jasmine looked on with despair and confusion in her eyes, not yet understanding what I intended to do, and when I reached him, I hoisted the stone above me while crouching in front of him. The weight of it, which had been 50 or 60 pounds, quickly became more than a little burdensome by the awkward position in which I had to hold it. But the arrow was close, 2 or 3 inches away, and I couldn't move. I could only brace myself for the impact and hope that I could counteract the force of the huge projectile without tottering or dropping the stone. I tried not to think of how much of a morbidly ironic twist of fate it would be if the arrow had embedded in the stone, but sent it flying right into Tim's face. When the arrow struck, I felt my arms immediately overcome by the sheer force of it. It wasn't fast, but it was unfightable. The arrow had simply continued its deadly descent as if there wasn't a slab in the way. Since I'd been facing away from him when I raised the stone, I couldn't see Tim's face and found myself thankful for that. I knew that I wouldn't be able to bear the sight of his eyes, filled with an unrelatable terror at seeing his imminent death, now promising to be even grislier. To have your face slowly crushed by a slab of concrete, your head gradually pushing back until your neck snapped. Weirdly, terribly, I couldn't simply drop the stone. I tried to release it, hoping that with the arrow now embedded in its surface, I could let gravity take them both, save Tim's life, and end this particular aspect of the nightmare. But when I released the slab, it simply moved along with the arrow. It was carried along with the same unstoppable momentum and glacial slowness. I stepped back to judge the distance and saw that there was only roughly 4 inches between Tim's nose and the downwardly angled slab. Desperately, I tried to move him, hoping against hope that Jasmine's rigid immovability had been tied more so to the chair than her person. But despite my greatest efforts, Tim wouldn't budge. He'd been firmly planted where he stood, and I couldn't move his body an inch in any direction. I heard Jasmine let out a low, anguished moan behind me and turned around. And turning around, I saw her staring with her eyes pouring tears. She had been watching my efforts the whole time and had come to accept the inevitable of her fiancé's death. I couldn't think of anything else to do, couldn't come up with a new plan or even some last-ditch effort. Going back to Tim, I wrapped my arms around him and gave him the tightest hug I could and thanked him for having been such a great friend to me. I watched as now tears gathered in his eyes and then released him. The stone and its arrow propellant were only 2 inches away from his face now. Not wanting Jasmine to witness Tim's assuredly violent and woeful, unpreventable death, I helped her up and I led her away from the courtyard. As we walked on deeper into the crystalline forest, I found myself growing increasingly unsettled by the quietness of it all. I thought to myself that I would have probably preferred to hear some evidence of Tim's demise, one final exclamation of life from him rather than the ceaseless dismal ambience of the forest. Jasmine remained mostly silent, the only sound she made being an occasional whimper or sigh when a new obstacle interrupted or diverted our progress. After 20 minutes or so, we came to the edge of the forest, where the vegetation wasn't so thickly covered in translucent wax, and where the regular, untouched, natural world was visible beyond the misty horizon. We were both tired, and I knew that Jasmine, having witnessed her fiancé's final moments and being forced to abandon him, needed rest as soon as possible. I told her to take my arm and close her eyes, and mustering up all my might, pushed into the densely accumulated mist. Just as I had done before, I focused on ignoring the alluring whispers that called for me to let go, to submit myself woefully and wholly to the specters hidden amidst the mist. It had been easier with the three of us. We talked to each other to take our minds off the hounding spirits. I saw them flit about, dancing and cavorting before me, attempting to get me to drop my guard. I squeezed Jasmine's hand a little tighter, but not enough to where the sensation would be cause for alarm. I just wanted to reassure her that everything was all right, and reassure myself that I wasn't alone with the sorceress phantoms. I knew that if I were to heed their charms, I'd be lost forever, that my spirit or consciousness would be doomed to join them in their eternal trapeze throughout the mist-laden fields. That fact alone was panic-inducing, but not entirely disagreeable. I hadn't anything of real value to go back to in the real world, beyond the mundanity of my regular life. But my life of eternal immateriality and thoughtless gaiety, however strange, wouldn't necessarily be any worse. But I had Jasmine to take care of, and knew that if I were to let go, she would soon follow. So shutting my mind against the ghastly voices and ghostly figures, I pushed on, and eventually cleared the mist. I took Jasmine home and wasn't sure if I should leave her alone or stay. She broke her funeral silence and asked me to spend the night. I agreed, and I settled myself on the living room couch, where Tim and I had spent countless hours playing couch co-op video games. Unsurprisingly, Jasmine went to bed almost immediately after she'd taken a shower. Sitting awake on the couch, with its silence and the colossal weight of my failure finally hitting me, I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. The hours crawled by, and I eventually decided that I needed to be sure. Needed to know that Tim was dead, that the arrow had flown its lethal course. It was still a few hours until sunrise, and I was confident that I could make it there and back again within that window. After checking on Jasmine, who I found firmly asleep, I put on my boots and I headed out. It wasn't hard to find the mist-enshrouded fields on the edge of town, and despite the fears that had arisen during the trip there, I managed to push through the ghost-haunted fog with ease. I thought that I'd have to fight off the voices even harder, but having gone through twice before, I found it much easier to dispel their clawing whispers from my mind. Again reaching the forest, I headed in the direction of that ancient courtyard, the location of which I had unconsciously memorized, perhaps always knowing that I'd need to return to be sure. After maybe 20 minutes of trudging through crystal-encased bushes and crunching over frosted grass with that ominous light above and around me, I finally reached the dilapidated courtyard with its crumbling, dry, entirely empty fountain and the death-trap gazebo. I kept my eyes fixed on the flagstone as I approached, not wanting to prematurely see any grisly details. I wanted to take it in all at once, to commit it into my memory so that I could accept and hopefully someday move past the full macabre burden of my failure. But upon reaching the gazebo, I was shocked. Though not appalled or horrified, its interior was empty. There was no sign of Tim, or the arrow that I was certain had entered, if not carried away, his skull. It was only the dust on the floor. The same dust that I'd noticed earlier. Nothing had been added to the pile. Above me, that blackly armored knight stared down smolderingly, its bowstring in an infinitively slow process of recoil. The shielded eyes still alight with some inner animacy. I looked around, leaving the gazebo and peering into the perimeter surrounding the courtyard. but I found no evidence of Tim's escape or death. There was only the dismal, ruined courtyard of some bygone era, the glazed leafage, the disconcerting ambience, the ethereal light. I returned to Jasmine's house just before sunrise. She was still asleep, but hadn't woken up in my absence. On the way there, I had promised myself I wouldn't tell her about Tim's mysterious absence from the courtyard, and upon peeking into her bedroom and seeing her peacefully resting face, knew with full certainty that I couldn't. I couldn't inspire the hope that he was somehow alive, that mystical forest could contain any number of horrors. And just because I hadn't been able to move him didn't mean that something else couldn't have. Something possessing monstrous strength. I sank into the couch, exhausted but unsleeping and waiting for the slow crawl of the sun in the sky. When the soft morning light filtered into the room, I felt a sudden lethargy fall over me. I remember the terrible, prophetic words of the questionably old gas station clerk. That strange man who told us about the fleetingly existent forest. I knew that with the sun's arrival came the forest's destruction, or relocation to some other sphere of time and space. Not just that, but Tim's own spectral transition as well. With this grim fact in mind, I was finally able to accept the circumstances, to let go of all hope, and for the moment, rest. But it wasn't until I had started to put together this document that I remembered being aware, not yet consciously taking notice, of the curiously empty fountain. The fountain had once contained what I had been sure was merely a grotesque sculpture of a huge and vaguely arachnid creature. My eyes stung with dry pain, and I rubbed them with my palms, trying to massage the last bit of moisture into them from the insides of my eyelids. Like wringing out a sponge that's been sitting in the desert sun, there's little benefit. Still, I continue to stare at the computer screen in my home office, waiting for the final calculations to finish. If I was right about this, the dark silhouette of a planet that I'd been staring at for the last 2 days really was capable of harboring life. Maybe even intelligent life. The thought seemed surreal and dreamlike. Further evidence of my exhausted state. Couldn't really be happening. It just wasn't possible, was it? A second later, the status bar showed complete, and the calculations were finally done. I began to read through the results, showing temperature variations and percentages of various compounds. Reading down from the top, my heart began to hammer faster and faster in my chest. Nitrogen, 78%. Oxygen, 20.9%. Argon, 0.9. Carbon dioxide, 0.03. Additional gases, see further breakdown below, 0.17. Median temperature, 58.43 degrees Fahrenheit. It was impossible. The composition of the atmosphere, the temperature, the size of the planet, and its proximity to its star, which just so happened to be a G-type yellow dwarf main sequence star, all these features, they were identical to Earth, which meant I discovered the one planet every astronomer had dreamed of finding. The unicorn, the Goldilocks, the twin to our one-of-a-kind blue speck in the middle of the impossibly vast ocean that is space. If there was one place amongst the stars that could harbor intelligent life, this was it. I sent an email to my superiors telling them what I discovered, but it bounced back saying undeliverable. After several more attempts, I tried calling, but the line was always busy no matter who I dialed. Frustrated and exhausted, I decided to wait till morning. The cell service in the area of Hawaii was notoriously terrible, so I'd try from a landline the next day. I hadn't slept in 48 hours. It was all catching up to me at once as my eyelids grew heavy and I wandered into the bedroom, collapsing onto the mattress. I fell asleep a second after my head hit the pillow, and I drifted into a deep sleep filled with mysterious dreams of lost stars the hidden planets. I awoke to the sight of a bright bluish-white light. It glared at me from the end of my bed, an opening like a giant mouth. A silhouette emerged from the light and then another. Just like the planet I had been watching through the telescope for so long, the figures blocked out a portion of that light, but only momentarily. And then there were hands roughly grabbing me and yanking me up from the warmth of my bed, pulling me across the floor with my feet dragging abrasively against the rough carpeting. "Hey, what are you doing? Where are you taking me?" I shouted, thrashing as I came back to alert wakefulness. They said nothing, only gripping me tighter as we drew closer to the blue swirling vortex of glowing light. We went into the portal and I felt extremely warm, then extremely cold, but only for a brief moment, until we came out the other side. Two robed figures stood before me and I saw that we were on a rooftop, overlooking a vast city. The buildings were towering, their features angular and sharp. Their highly reflective surfaces were tinged pink and blue, and I suddenly realized why they looked so bizarre. We're there, aren't we? On the planet, I discovered. The figures standing before me didn't say anything. They only stared blankly at me. As I observed the foreign planet in wonderment, I saw that the aliens who lived here were far more advanced than humans on Earth. They looked like a city from Star Wars. Floating spacecrafts docked and took off from ports built into massive skyscrapers. These gargantuan towers extended thousands of feet into the air, disappearing into the clouds above. Floating spacecrafts of all sizes and shapes were traveling through the city, a light on those docks like bees pollinating flowers. "How did you know I found you?" I asked. Can you even understand me?" They didn't answer. "You must be able to understand me if you could read my emails and intercept them. Why didn't you want my superiors to know about this place?" Without responding, the taller of the two hooded figures nodded down to the streets far below us. I looked over the precipice and saw activity beneath us. A city full of life. Full of aliens going about their day-to-day business. I couldn't make out much detail through the haze of smog, but it looked dim and dreary down below. There was a noise and a flash of light, and we were suddenly standing there at a street level. The aliens had advanced technology that allowed us to teleport through space in an instant, and they deployed it readily. No walking around for these creatures, no elevators or stairs either. Vehicles which hovered above the ground at various levels packed the open air above the street. I looked up and saw that despite the added third dimension being employed to ease congestion, the traffic jams were still occurring. Each level of flying cars were honking, and there were creatures leaning out of the windows of their vehicles, barking in an alien tongue and gesturing with tentacles covered in fish-hooked claws on one side. Street vendors were selling paper plates full of foul-smelling meat to customers who had lined up to purchase lunch. A dozen or more were standing near us, and I was careful to stay close to the hooded figure who were now acting as my guides. The creatures of this planet were tall, wide, gelatinous. They had probuses instead of mouths, and tentacles instead of arms and legs, which they used to propel themselves. Similar to how octopi move in a myriad of different ways, some of them walked on their back tentacles, almost like bipedal humans, while others slithered and moved snake-like across the pavement. They also changed colors, I noticed, depending on the background behind them. Surprisingly, none of them seemed to notice as the three of us stood watching them silently from shaded spots near a building. The hooded figure standing next to me raised an extremity which was shrouded in robes. I looked where they were pointing and saw something very odd. A man was coming out of the sewer grate in the middle of the street. Hovering cars were honking at him and splashing with mud as they sped past. He seemed not to notice. His face was calm and passive, and there was a collar around his neck, covered in blinking lights. "What the hell?" I muttered, watching him go about his duties. He was bringing buckets of brown, slimy muck up from the sewers. His face and clothes were smeared with it, and I could smell the disgusting stench from where I stood, at least 30 yards away. "Why is there a person here?" I asked the hooded figure. "There can't be a person here. We're further away from each other than any spacecraft is capable of traveling. Assuming that we're where I think we are." Then, a moment later, we teleported again. We were no longer on street level, but instead we were far below ground in a dark mine. The sound of pickaxes, chisels, and hammers could be heard over the cacophony of voices and minecarts which traveled across nearby rails. The voices were human, I realized, and as we drew closer to see a group of men working at the walls with crude tools, each one had the same collar covered in blinking lights, snugly secured around their necks. They were the same collars as the one I'd seen the man wearing on the street level. Their faces were calm and passive. None of them looked angry or upset. Instead, there were no expressions at all. As they loaded up minecarts full of rock materials, I saw that once they were full, they would send them off down the tracks. More carts would come to take their place as they would fill those up, sending them off down the tracks as well, in a never-ending monotony of movements. The men and women worked tirelessly, and none of them stopped for an instant to rest. I looked at my guides, beginning to grow angry. What is this place? What are you doing with these people? The hooded figures looked at each other and nodded, then turned back to me and revealed their faces. My guides were human. They looked different. Battle-scarred and branded with strange numeric tattoos and barcodes which covered their skin. The one on the left was a man, the one on the right a woman. Both had shaved heads and brown eyes. We need to show you what will happen if you contact your superiors about this planet. If we didn't, then this timeline would become prime. Trust me, you don't want this. I looked back and forth between their unreadable faces, then again at the hordes of human servants, being forced by giant aliens into servitude. I was terrified, but the scientist in me needed to know what all of this meant. And I'll admit, looking back, my pride was badly wounded just thinking about denouncing my findings. I mean, they were huge. I discovered another planet capable of supporting life in the most optimal conditions imaginable. Not only that, but there actually was life on this planet. What are you saying? I can't tell anyone about my findings or else this will happen? And let me guess, this is a simulation or a hallucination or something like that, right? This isn't real. This is very real. This is the future if you choose to continue on the path you've chosen. Despite what you may think, this will come to pass within your lifetime if you do not follow what we tell you. I thought about this for a moment. I can't keep this discovery to myself. I just can't. I live by a code as a scientist, and I can't break that code. I can't just keep something like this a secret. But don't worry. We won't try to contact this other planet. We'll just observe it. I'll be sure of that. The man turned to look at the woman. You were right. He's too stupid to save. No matter what we do, he'll tell them what he found. She sighed. I regret to say that you're right, Zanhag. We'll have to leave him be. She snapped her fingers, and I noticed that a slight hissing sound, which had been surrounding me without my notice, was suddenly gone. Like when the power goes out and you realize how quiet it is without the fridge running. The aliens and all the humans nearby turned to look at me, and I realized they could see me now. He's trying to escape, one of the men nearby said blandly with no emotion. His collar blinked yellow, then green, making a pleasant chiming noise. His eyes rolled back into his head as if he had just received a boost of dopamine. I'll stop him, a woman nearby me said, reaching out and grabbing a hold of me. He's tall, he looks strong. He'll be a good worker for the mines. I pulled away from her. Several others started moving in towards me from all around. Help, please! I won't say anything. Just let me go back. I want to go back, I screamed, trying to get back into the faint haze blue bubble surrounding my hosts. The people who had brought me to this place could no longer be seen inside, but I imagined them shaking their heads. I'll tell them this planet's a wasteland. It's uninhabitable. Please, just let me go back. And they seemed to consider this. After a few long moments, just as the dirty hands of mining prisoners all around me were about to grab hold of me, they pulled me back into the protective bubble of invisibility. Once I was back inside, they looked at me sternly, and the woman began to speak. We are from the future, even past this one, when humans stand up against their captive overlords and begin to fight back. Unfortunately, we're outnumbered and outgunned. However, we've managed to gain one advantage. A mission to capture several pieces of enemy technology allowed us this one opportunity. This one chance to go back in time and fix things. Now that you've seen it firsthand, you must understand why you cannot share your findings about this planet with anyone as long as you live. You must keep this place a secret, the man said gravely. I will. I can see now that this is real. You're trying to protect us from contacting these creatures for a reason, I said, too terrified to argue with them. We all talked about this possibility amongst each other in the break room. In the lab, around the computers, while we looked at images of planets we discovered. The question was on all of our minds. What if we find intelligent life, but it turns out they're much more advanced? What if they're a super predator and they don't want to share this universe with anyone else? That's exactly why you must keep this a secret. I repeat, you can't tell anyone about your discovery. If you do, this is what will come of the human race. We'll live in chains for 100 years, perhaps much longer. He snapped his fingers. I found myself back in bed, in my home once again. It was morning, and birds were chirping outside my window. The possibility occurred to me that it all could have been a nightmare. It felt so real, I thought to myself, but it wasn't a dream. I was sure of that after seeing the bruises on my arms from where the future humans had roughly grabbed me. But still, my discovery was too big to ignore. I couldn't just let it go to waste. I went over to my desk again and I looked at the unsent email from the night prior, which I tried to send to my boss. The coordinates of the planet, the makeup of its atmosphere so similar to Earth. It was right there, waiting to be sent. I couldn't help myself. I hit the send button. And I know some of you will be upset with me, but you don't understand. This discovery is going to be huge. It's going to change the world. It's going to change everything. My name is Lyman. Who I am beyond that is of little importance. This story is not about me. All you need to know is that I was once a close acquaintance of a man named John Arbuckle. 4 years ago, he took his cat, Garfield, up to his family's old farm and never returned. His car, a pink sedan which he would sometimes refer to as Abigail, was found parked in the driveway of the old farmhouse, but John and his cat were nowhere to be seen. At the time of his disappearance, his dog Odie, who is now in my care, has been checked into a kennel a few miles from his home. The kennel's cam footage from that day is the last known sighting of John Arbuckle. Police opened a missing persons case due to my insistence, but quickly closed it after evidence suggested no foul play. Grown men with a few friends and no immediate family are on low priority lists for the police when deciding which case to allocate resources towards. Detectives concluded that John may have simply decided to uproot and look for a fresh start somewhere else. You'd be surprised how often it happens, investigators told me. And for a while, I tried to convince myself that this was the case. But still, something did not sit right with me. John was a lonely man. This much was true. As was the fact that he didn't have much in the way of family. His father passed tragically 2 years ago in a farming accident, and his mother followed shortly after. It is said she died of a broken heart. His brother, Doc Boy, lives in a home for adults with special needs upstate. John used to visit every other Sunday. John had bad luck with women and never married. For a little while, he dated a veterinarian, though their relationship fell apart a few weeks after his vanishing. It was around that time John cut off communication from the few remaining people in his inner circle, myself included. He stopped going to work or visiting Doc Boy, and was said by the neighbors to have become brusque and standoffish whenever they spotted him walking Odie around the neighborhood. Though I did my best to stay in touch, it became increasingly clear that John wanted nothing to do with me, as my calls and visits were frequently ignored. I did manage to save some of his possessions just before the estate sale of his home, including a few crude etchings that he had made, as well as leather-bound notebooks that he had been journaling in. I debated for a few days whether or not I should read it. On one hand, I wanted to respect my dear friend's privacy. On the other, I was curious to know just what was going through the mind of John Arbuckle in the months leading up to his disappearance. In the end, curiosity won out, and I justified my intrusion by telling myself the journal might even provide some clues to his whereabouts. What I found exceeded my wildest dreams. The notebook was filled with bizarre writings and peculiar drawings, some of which evoked a stomach-turning dread in me when my eyes fell upon them. I read the terrible tome in one night, not looking up from its hideous pages, until I had studied it completely. And once I had finished, I believed I knew what had happened to my friend. Now I feel it's my duty to share it with you. If for no other reason, then as a warning of what happens when one investigates that which is best left unknown. This is the Journal of John Arbuckle. February 14th. No date tonight. Liz had to work late. Something to do with a dog that needs to get its stomach pumped. Kind of sad about it. But I understand. Odie needs more than a few trips to the ER due to the trouble that he gets into. That's just how dogs can be. Garfield, on the other hand, is too lazy to get himself into that kind of trouble. And I'm pretty sure he's gotten an iron stomach because that cat can eat anything. I'm not mad at Liz. This is supposed to be a makeup date anyway. And I'm usually the one who has to cancel. Last time we had something planned, Garfield let Odie out of the house and he came back covered in fleas. Oh well. I'll continue my reading then. I finally managed to track down a copy of the book that I've been hearing about for years. It's impossible to find on the internet, but I was able to get a copy, lent to me by a like-minded pen pal of mine, we'll call her V, who also partakes in the study of rare literature. Once she heard my thoughts on Agrippa and read the letter I wrote her about Mather's thoughts on tarot, she told me I might find the answers I've been looking for in the works of a man named Alhazad. I was taken aback when she explained that she not only had read the book herself, but she was willing to loan me a copy in return for notes on any experiments I might conduct while it was in my possession. Now, I had to admit, I was beginning to think the book was a myth. And I'd even considered the possibility that my pen pal was pulling my leg until last week when it showed up on my doorstep. After scanning it, I can see why they call the author the Mad Arab. Some of the ideas are mind-bending, to say the least. I'm not sure what my pen pal's expecting me to tell her about it. I suppose I'll give it more of an in-depth read before I decide to write her back. February 19th. Liz is so mad at me. I was supposed to meet her at the movies for our makeup date, but I couldn't find my car keys anywhere. I spent an hour and a half looking for them, but they were nowhere to be seen. Turns out Garfield was sleeping on them. Once I found them, I hurried to the movies as fast as I could. I tried to explain what happened to her, but she didn't want to hear it. We missed the whole flick. Sometimes I feel like Odie is the only one who isn't disappointed in me. But then I realize Odie's pretty much impossible to disappoint, so I don't think that counts. As for Garfield, I think the jury's out on how he actually feels about me. I swear, that cat is so spoiled. I should have booted him out of the house after he ate the pizza I ordered yesterday while I was paying the delivery guy. Maybe then he'd appreciate everything I do for his fat orange butt. Well, looks like I've got another night of studying ahead of me. I can think of worse ways to pass the time. There's just so much to take in with this book. I don't know if I'll ever finish. Some of it's written in a strange language, but I can't seem to find anything on the internet that might tell me what the origin of the characters are. Some of the language doesn't exist anymore. The book was said to be penned hundreds of years ago. Maybe it was a secret code that needs to be deciphered. When I write my pen pal tonight, I'll make sure to ask her about it. There's an interesting bit I found the other night about ascending to a higher level of awareness. The part I find intriguing was that it wasn't just written as some esoteric philosophy meant to change my way of thinking about life and spirituality. It was more of a step-by-step instruction manual. And I think that it's suggesting that if I follow the directions, I'll be able to increase my cognitive performance by opening up the mind to higher realities. I imagine how amazing it might be if Doc Boy was smart enough to care for himself. I could move him out of that home, maybe into an apartment, and he could live a normal life. What a dream that would be. Probably just a dream, though. I'll make sure to ask V what her thoughts are on this chapter as well. Anyway, time to read. March 1st. It's been a long 2 weeks. I'm so tired, and I have that book to thank for that. Just so darn interesting. Each time I turn the page, I feel like I'm learning something new, but here's the thing. Every interesting tidbit in this book just raises more questions. It sent me down some deep rabbit holes, and I don't know if I could master the text if I had 100 years to study it. It's filled with comforting mathematical equations, bizarre incantations, and of course, that mysterious language that I haven't been able to decipher. The parts that are translated are still equally as puzzling. They're writings of ancient faraway worlds and beings of immense power, pagan rituals, long-forgotten races of creatures whose consciousness exists outside of time itself. I'm hoping V writes me back soon because I have a million more questions that I need to ask her. I don't want her to think I'm a total neophyte, though, so maybe I should play it cool for now and just stick to the improving intelligence stuff. I've noticed that a lot of this chapter has to do with dreaming. I've always forgot what I dreamt about as soon as I wake up, but I've already started to keep a dream journal. It's supposed to help me recall them more easily, you know? Yeah, I finally went out with Liz last week, by the way. We went to this fancy restaurant where she first told me that she had feelings for me. Gosh, that seems like forever ago. I was dressed like a maitre d'. She was on a date with some other guy. I mean, it's a long story. Don't get me wrong, I was totally thrilled to be out with Liz again, but the book was dominating my mind all through the dinner. I couldn't stop thinking about how life-changing it would be for Doc Boy, heck, even myself, if I could use the directions outlined in the book to trigger the ascension of our minds to a higher level. It would be incredible if I could somehow figure out how to raise my brother's intellect. And gee golly, I wouldn't mind if my IQ went up a few points too. Maybe then I'd at least be able to better understand some of the bewildering things I've been reading in that book over the past couple of weeks. Liz came back to my place after the date. I mean, I was excited to have some private time with her, but when we got to my room, Garfield was asleep in my bed and wouldn't budge his fat butt. So we ended up watching TV for an hour, and then she went home. I slept on the couch after she left, and now my back is killing me. I swear that cat's gonna be the death of me. March 4th. I had a weird dream last night. I do like to keep my dream journal separate from this one, but for the sake of research, I think I might copy what I wrote here. Something's nagging at me to write it down again. Anyway, so forgive the broken sentences. I begin writing as soon as I wake up and my mind isn't exactly firing on all cylinders. I'm in a city. Buildings, not like normal ones, not made of metal and glass. Made of tall dirt mounds like massive anthills. Some anthill buildings connected by bridges. Somehow I know beneath the ground are millions of interconnecting tunnels. 2 red suns burn in an orange sky above. The air's thick, like rainforest thick. But there's no plants, just dirt mounds as far as an eye can see. I move into one of the anthills, down empty corridors and into a room. I'm surrounded by books. But they aren't books. I mean, not like books I've read before. Books are actually pink, fleshy creatures with trunk-like noses and black, beady eyes. The skin is clammy, slimy. This feels good against my pincher. Pincher? Yeah, pincher. I have no hands. Not my body. Something else's body. Not human. Not of this world. I extend my tongue. Must be a foot long, and it runs it against the bubbly growth on the clammy book thing's back. These growths were placed on this creature long ago by great authors. I lick the growths, taste the pus that oozes from its sores and receive the knowledge it provides me. It tells me of the worlds beyond my own, of hideous beings and of deities from the stars. Wow, what a weird dream, right? My memory pretty much goes blank after that, but I can't believe I was able to remember so much. John Arbuckle, you dream about some weird stuff. No more late night snacks for you. March 5th. Another dream last night. This one was more pleasant than the last, but it stayed with me, and I haven't been able to think of anything else all morning. I'll transcribe it from my dream journal again. It feels, I guess, significant. Again, apologies if the prose is subpar. I haven't had my morning coffee when I write this down. But I'm a child, and I'm back in my family farm in the hills behind Arkham, and I'm playing in the fields where my dad and grandpa plant wheat. It's morning, and I wander off a little ways until I come to a brook. Now, just to the left of the water is a rock wall covered with shrubs and vines. Vines are hiding the entrance to some cave. No, not just the entrance. Strange hexagonal columns as well, just outside of the mouth of the cave. I enter the cave, and I notice more strange columns inside. Some crumbling, some looking brand new. Was this cave used for something? My heart tells me yes. I hear my Gramps calling my name. He's there when I exit the cave. It's dark out. Where's the time gone? It was just morning, wasn't it? Normally I'd be scared, but now I'm not because Gramps is with me. Gramps kneels down, grabs my hand, tells me to hurry home, but before he lets go, he pulls me close and whispers in my ear. He says there's a chest in the attic, and if I look through it, I'll find something that I might want one day. I hurry home. Where's he gone? Why didn't he come with me? And now I'm scared. I'm running all alone through the darkness towards my house. I only breathe a sigh of relief when I see the house, but then I remember what Gramps told me about the trunk in the attic. No one else is home. Where are my parents? Where's Doc Boy? I'm hungry, but I go up to the attic instead of the kitchen. The trunk is there, sitting beside an old writing desk on the far side of the room. Moonlight shines through the window directly on top of it like a searchlight. I rummage through it. Inside, I find some parchment paper with curious arabesque designs on them, and there at the bottom of the chest is a silver key. I pick it up. I hold it in my hand. I feel like time has stopped. I don't remember anything else after that. Guess I'll need to get better at recalling my dreams a little. When I was a kid, I would have the most vivid and wild dreams about faraway kingdoms where I was king and mysterious forests that I would enjoy exploring. But they were also realistic. This dream was kind of like that, though. Especially the part where I was in the cave. Hell, it felt like a memory, even. I can't recall the experience even actually happening, and I'm pretty sure there's no cave on the family farm, but gosh, it was so realistic. And what was the key? I wonder if I went back to the farmhouse and looked through the attic, if I'd find it there, in the old chest. Nah. March 5th. Continued. Holy cow! I just realized. Those strange arabesque designs on the parchment paper from my dream, they looked exactly like characters from the undecipherable language in the book. I'm curious as to what it would say. March 6th. V wrote back. There really is no way to describe how happy I was to see her letter in the mail. I jumped for joy when I pulled it out of my mailbox. Mrs. Feeney nearly had a heart attack when she saw me dancing in the street. I found the letter to be very informative. For instance, my pen pal explained that the mysterious language that I've been trying to decipher is called Relayan, and was created by an ancient people that lived so long ago that they predate recorded history. She said that while she doesn't understand it herself, she knows that there are scholarly groups based along the Miskatonic who are more knowledgeable on the subject than she is. I was surprised to hear her mention Miskatonic County because, well, that's where my family's farm is located. Small world, I would guess. Wonder if Gramps ever ran into that group. If there really are people out there who can read the language, then I'd very much like to learn from them. Part of the book I've been studying the most, the directions about increasing the expanse of my mind, require me to speak words from that language out loud while I'm performing the experiment. And boy, I'll tell you, I don't even know how to pronounce Yanashla Za Nia Sathloth He Igben Phi Thorog. About the experiment, V told me that she didn't think that it would help Doc Boy's situation, though. I found this to be disappointing. I understand that she knows a lot about this text, and I was hoping that she'd have more insight on the particular chapter, but unfortunately she said that she had been more interested in the bits in the book that discuss necromancy. Ugh. Dead people. Who'd be interested in that? I'm beginning to think that my pen pal is kind of a weirdo. She warned me that the experiment might not yield the results that I'm looking for, which was also sort of discouraging. Still, I think I'm going to try things out for myself, and if it works for me, then maybe it will work for Doc Boy too. I'll write her back and I'll let her know I'm planning on pursuing it. I'm sure she'll be interested to hear my updates. Oh, on another note, Odie keeps licking my face when I'm trying to meditate. Between him and Garfield, I think I might blow a gasket soon. March 12th. I've definitely been remembering my dreams more clearly. I'm going to transcribe last night's from my dream journal. I'm in the kitchen preparing a lasagna for Liz and myself. Odie suddenly bursts in through the dog door and begins tracking mud all over the house. Odie! I shout. I'm extremely annoyed because Odie knows not to play in the mud. I put the lasagna out of the oven and leave it on the counter to cool. I grab Odie and I wash him off in the bathroom, but when I come back to the kitchen, I find Garfield has eaten the whole lasagna. Garfield! I scream. Liz is going to be over any minute and I have no dinner. Garfield then slowly turns his head to me. He looks me dead in the eyes and says,
I'm sorry, John. You'll need a silver key if you wish to find the answers that you seek.
I'm freaked out by the cat saying such a weird thing to me, but it's the look in his eyes that have spooked me more than anything. It feels threatening and yet not personal at the same time, like when a lion stalks a baby gazelle. The lion has no bad feelings about the gazelle. It just needs to eat. I feel like the gazelle in that moment, and before I'm able to ask Garfield to clarify, he speaks again.
You must obtain the silver key, John. There's so much more to know.
He begins to swell after that, expanding like one of those Macy's Thanksgiving Day floats. Strange growths sprout from his swelling body. They look like tentacles covered in fur. His face changes too. His teeth grow larger, sharper. His eyes are red and bloodshot. I scream for help, but nobody hears me, not even Odie. I begin to run. There are things in the walls. They look like faces. Some of them are human, some just like mine, but some not of this world. Garfield is stalking me now. He's hunting me in my own home. Where are the doors? Where have they gone? And here's the thing that scares me the most. It's not the cat thing I'm thinking about, as I'm sprinting off as fast as I can, huffing for breath, knowing the creature is at my heels. All that keeps running through my head is this. Yeah, you're right. I must obtain the silver key. So much more to know. Next thing I know, I was in bed and it was morning. Another weird dream. Why would I have such strange thoughts while that Garfield monster was chasing me? I know that Jung used to say that dreams are allegorical, that they represent archetypes of the unconscious mind. Maybe that was my brain's way of telling me something. Should I head back to the farmhouse and see if there really is something in the attic? March 28th. What's there to report? Well, I've been having more strange dreams. I'll spare myself the trouble of writing them down twice today, but I might as well summarize the big stuff. They all seem to be about the weird anthill city. Each time, I'm learning more and more about the creatures there. It's a race of intelligent life called the Nermoth. Their home is a tiny red planet located in the Alpha Centauri star system. The time period is roughly 15,000 years in the past. I was able to pick that up using context clues based on my understanding of astronomy. The Nermoth look kind of like massive gray cats with faces that splay open at the center, where 4 rows of red finger-like projections run all the way down their snouts. They use those fingers to talk to each other by rubbing them up against the finger tentacles of their neighbors. So much of their communication is done through touch. They read through taste, but I explained that already a few days ago. They have 8 spindly legs that come to sharp talon points, and crab-like pinchers where our hands would be. But I'm not yet sure what they're used for. I haven't had any more dreams like the one that I had about Garfield. I'd much rather dream about creepy alien cat bugs than relive that nightmare again. But I haven't had any more dreams about Gramps and the family farm either. Still, I think about it a lot these days. Also that key. Think about that silver key, too. April 1st. This is not an April Fool's joke. Liz broke up with me. She said she couldn't be with a guy that lets her pets dictate his life. Especially, and she made sure to emphasize this, Garfield. I'm pretty upset. Maybe if I can learn how to expand my mind, just like the book says, then I'll find out how to win her back. But I'm upset at Garfield as well. He ruined things for Liz and I time and time again. Sometimes I think my life would just be better off without him. Well, I guess the breakup gives me more time to focus on my studies. I have more reading to do tonight. It should, at the very least, help to distract from Liz. I'm gonna write V2. Maybe she'll know if there's any love spells in this book. April 6th. Went to see Doc Boy yesterday. He's doing fine. I was absolutely drained after the visit. That's 2-hour drive to the assisted living facility, and after that he wanted to play Go Fish with me for like 3 hours. Then Old Maid for another 2. On the way back, I stopped by the old farm. Guess I should have sold it years ago, but after Mom passed, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Place is starting to get kind of run down, though. The weeds are overgrown, the fields are running wild. And inside the house, there's enough dust to cover even Garfield's fat butt. It's been probably 2 years since I've gone back home, and it was weird being there. Everything was exactly like it was the last time I came to visit. I think that was the old Arbuckle Christmas party. Dad's worn-out leather chair was still there. Mom's needlepoint was laid out on the table. I even found some spoiled milk in the fridge. Ugh. On the dining room, I came across the family portrait that we had done with Gramps. Back when Gramps was still alive. I was a little shocked to see just how clearly I remembered him in my dream. I mean, he died when I was 8. You'd think I would have gotten some of the details wrong, but I guess the old Arbuckle memory, it's as sharp as a tack. Speaking of the dream, that's kind of the reason why I was there in the first place. Ever since the other night, I hadn't been able to get the silver key out of my head. I had to know if it was real or just some weird fantasy. Can't say I was too surprised to find the chest in the attic. I was even less surprised to see that it had my Gramps' initials on it. I know Dad didn't like Gramps' hobbies, but I also know that he couldn't part with any of the old man's prized possessions after he died. I always wondered where he kept his old books, and now I know. That dream I had of me as a boy, it must have been at least some sort of quasi-memory, because when I opened the chest, not only did I find Gramps' books, but the parchment papers with the relay and writing on them. And on top of it all, buried at the very bottom under a few old dusty tomes, was the very same silver key from my dreams. I must have seen it at some point when I was a kid. I can't remember when, though. I held it up in the air, but time didn't stop or anything like that. I mean, in fact, nothing really special happened at all. Still, I took everything from the chest back home with me that night. I'll give it more thought through examinations later, but for now, I gotta get caught up on my reading. April 21st. My pen pal has written me back, and I have to admit, I'm very disappointed with what she had to say. Now, in my opinion, she was rather insulting. She said that she had thought that I was more disciplined and a learned scholar, and that she had made a mistake of lending her book to me. V even ended her letter by insisting that I send the book back right away. Can you believe it? What a jerk. Well, I guess I'll send it back to her. It is hers after all, but that doesn't mean that I can't transcribe the parts of it that I've been studying first. Ha! Sucker. In other news, Garfield has been a total pain in the butt. Eating me out of house and home. Last night, he got into the pantry, practically cleared it out. All I had to eat for breakfast this morning was the crumbs from the bottom of my cereal box. With water. Between him, Doc Boy, my pen pal's sudden change of heart, and Liz, this has not been the best couple of weeks. April 30th. I haven't updated in a while, but there's good reason for that. I've been working hard at transcribing the book before I send it back to my pen pal. Figured I'd just copy over the parts that I needed. I mean, after all, who cares about necromancy? Ugh. I think I'll be all finished after tonight. My dreams are becoming much more vivid. And now I can remember them with total and complete lucidity. It was pretty cool. I have my meditations and my dream journal to thank for that. What isn't cool is how I can't seem to dream about anything other than that weird anthill city and that strange race of creatures called the Nermalth. In every dream, I assume the role of one particular Nermalth. From what I can tell, the creature is a female member of the species of low social standings with interest in hidden knowledge. She studies forbidden literature, or whatever you might call books written using the sores of those slimy pink animals she licks. I guess her thirst for knowledge is a lot like mine in a way. Seems that a lot of the stuff she's reading, I too have studied in the book my pen pal sent me. So much of my dream seems to cross over with what I'm studying. Wonder what that means. Oh, finally, my luck appears to be turning around. Liz has agreed to go out with me again. I think I'll take her to the fancy French restaurant downtown. Everything will have to be perfect, though. She said this is my last chance to make things right. Garfield left the biggest hairball in my shoes today. I didn't realize until I put them on. Sometimes I wish I could just toss them out with the trash. I'm at my wit's end with that cat. May 10th. I had another dream. This one was bizarre. I was back in the cave that I dreamt about, only this time I was an adult and I was practicing the ritual that I read about in the book. When I finished, I held up the silver key and I turned it in a very specific way in the air as if I was trying to unlock some invisible door. Almost as soon as I finished, the cave ceased to exist. And yet, it was still there. It's hard to describe. There was neither a cave nor an absence of a cave. Reality had become fluid and ever-changing. Not tangible, but still real enough for me to reach out and touch. I was in no place and every place at the same time. I was one with the universe, and I had this particular vision that the universe had unlocked in a way. I knew someone terrible would contact me soon, and I knew who it would be. Alhazad had written about him. The affair that shambleth about in the night, the evil that defieth the elder sign. The herd that stand watch at the secret portal each tomb is known to have, and that thrive on that which groweth out of the tenants within. All these blacknesses are larger than he who guardeth the gateway. He who will guide the rash ones beyond all the worlds into the abyss of unnameable devourers. For he is Atal, the most ancient one, which the scribe rendereth as the prolonged of life. Strange shapes floated before me, moving in and out of themselves at impossible angles, and I couldn't help but get the impressions that I was only looking at a shadow of what they truly were. In the shapes, I saw alien worlds, underwater cities, bizarre creatures hurtling through space. Eventually, after what felt like eons passed, the space I was occupying started to shift and transform into a vast marble room. At the far end of the room was a veil, and behind it I could see pedestals. Floating atop one of the pedestals was a familiar figure, a form that vaguely resembled Garfield. Upon closer look, I could see that whatever was beneath the fabric moved and gesticulated in a way that reminded me of a bait bag filled with night crawlers. The figure began to speak in a booming voice, only I didn't hear its voice with my ears. Instead, it ran through my mind.
I am the Ancient One,
it said to me.
We have awaited you.
I asked the creature if it had the answers to make myself and Doc Boy smarter and more capable.
Through the ultimate gate is the answer to every question in every reality that will ever exist. Realities where Bill Murray is my voice. Reality where Lorenzo Music is my voice. Reality where Lorenzo Music is Bill Murray's voice. And infinity.
I didn't quite know what he meant by that, but I didn't ask him to clarify because I didn't want to look like an idiot in front of the most ancient one. He continued on.
You've passed through the first gate. If you wish to pass through the ultimate gate, you must complete the ritual and use the silver key.
The room began to change again, but before I could see what it was turning into, I woke up. May 12th. Well, my big last chance date didn't go well at all, and guess whose fault it was? That's right. Garfield. Of course. I was already running behind because Odie had eaten a ball of yarn and was having trouble passing it. That's right, had to pull it out of the back end and a whole ball of yarn. Once I had finished, I jumped into old Abigail and raced over to Liz's. If I hadn't been in such a hurry, I would have looked in the back seat and seen Garfield napping there. I didn't even know he was in the car until Liz pointed him out. "Are you serious?" she said. "You brought Garfield with you?" I hoped that he would just nap the whole time, but as soon as we got to the restaurant, he woke up. I think he smelled the food. He insisted on joining us for dinner, and Liz was not pleased. She barely even said goodbye when I dropped her off at her place. I'm so angry at that cat. I could just scream. And get this, I had brought home some leftovers, but Garfield gobbled them up before I had the chance to put them in the fridge. I hate him. Normally I would study a bit before going to bed, but since that dream about the Ancient One the other night, I feel like there's nothing else to learn. April 13th. Got a text from Liz. She said she would be more comfortable if we just kept our relationship professional. It's gonna be weird when I take Odie in for his checkup next week. Life sucks. This is all Garfield's fault. If he didn't exist, then she and I would still be together. April 15th. It's been running through my head all night. I mean, I could use Garfield in my experiment, right? One of the things that's been holding me back is that it requires a sacrifice in order to complete it. he would be perfect. He's never been good for anything, but maybe he could finally be of some use to me. Tomorrow night, I'm going to board Odie, and then it'll just be me and him. What do I have to lose? Worst case scenario, he's out of my hair. I keep looking at him writing this. He's just sleeping there in his bed under the blanket. I can't stand that smug cat. April 16th. Everything's in order. I picked up all the stuff I need. Now I just need to get Odie out of here. Today for lunch I made Garfield a whole lasagna. Of course he ate it in a heartbeat. Hope you like the food because it'll be his last meal. A quick note. It's here that John's handwriting changes considerably. It seemed as if he had some terrible accident that caused him to lose much of his motor functions. His penmanship was scribbled and forced, almost completely illegible, and it seemed as though he lost his grip on reality. It is clear that whatever happened at the farm left him extremely disturbed. August 28. I'm home. Thousands of years have passed, and yet I'm now back here in my parents' farmhouse mere days after having performed the ritual. So hard to write, these hands. Not hands. Pinchers. This body. Everything's so awkward. So clunky. I'll do my best to explain what has happened. The experiment exceeded far beyond my imagination. I drove Abigail out in the morning after checking Odie into the pet hotel. In the back seat of my car was Garfield, and everything I had copied over from the book. In my pocket, the key. It was noon when Garfield and I made it to the family farmhouse. I parked in the driveway, carried the cat to the brook that runs through my family's property. Together we followed the stream until we came to the cave that I dreamed about. Though I did not know it would be there, I wasn't surprised to find it. It looked just as I envisioned. We entered past the hexagonal columns and into the mouth of the cave. It was here that I found myself standing in a shrine of sorts, built by my Gramps from his own rituals. It'd be the perfect place to perform my experiment. No one would find me. No one would hear Garfield. The instructions required me to perform a set of unspeakable acts to the cat, and he was nearly dead by the time I finished. As much as I disliked him, I took no joy in his suffering. I finished him off by opening his throat with a ceremonial dagger and draining his blood into the chalice. I placed his carcass in front of me and then proceeded with the experiment by drinking his blood and repeating those words. Yanash lasagna sathath hig ben fi throdok. And just as in my dream, the cave began to give way to some new, unseen reality. One that exists in the same space as this one. In a matter of moments, I saw the same familiar entity I had written about before, waiting for me behind a veil and floating atop a stone pillar. Only this time I knew it wasn't a dream. It exuded a fearsome aura. Just as before, the creature was shrouded in a veil. Underneath it seemed to be some fluid form of my cat, and I say my cat because it was the shape it resembled most, but the form often moved, shifted in various forms, geometric shapes before returning back to its cat-like shape. I knew it was him. I was face to face with Ermatal. I wanted to run, even though at this point there was nowhere to run to. Up was down, left was right, Ana was kata, so instead I made the appropriate greetings just as I was instructed to do in the book that my pen pal had lent me, that hideous tome, that Necronomicon.
I am indeed the most ancient one of whom you know.
The guide's voice boomed in my mind without sound or language.
I and the other Ancient Ones have waited you. You have the key and have unlocked the first gate. Now, the ultimate gate is ready for your trial. If you fear, you need not advance. If it is Monday, you need not advance. For I deplore Mondays.
I never had a problem with Mondays, so that wasn't going to stop me. But I was a bit afraid when he first made himself appear to me. However, I had been through too much and studied too hard to turn back now. There was no way I was going to let anything stop me. "I'll advance," I said to him, "and I'll accept you as my guide field." Following my reply, the guide lifted his paws and made a number of swirling motions with them. As he did this, a light that was a color no human had ever witnessed arose from the ether, swaddling me in it and bathing me in its warmth. In this moment, I became aware of a strange quasi-sphere that had appeared, twisting in and out of itself, and I realized then that it was the source from where the light was emanating. None of my dreams over the past few weeks felt as real, felt as vivid as what I was experiencing in that moment. The quasi-sphere drifted toward me, and as it did, so I could hear the chanting of the Ancient Ones in my mind.
We salute you, John Arbuckle, whose daring has made you one of us. We salute you, John Arbuckle, whose daring has made you one of us.
The sphere began to pulsate. I knew then that the silver key was my passport to wherever it wanted to take me. I was still in possession of it, so I lifted it up to the sphere as it drifted ever closer. What exactly the sphere was, or how I was supposed to use it, was unclear to me. I was moving on instinct alone, that and my belief that the most ancient one was pulling at the strings of my body, guiding me through this journey. The sphere swallowed me. I was surrounded by blackness and incomprehensible darkness that enveloped all of my senses. I could hear nothing, feel nothing. I had no perception of even my body, but just as I thought I might be lost forever in this black void, I heard his voice again.
The man of truth is beyond good and evil. The man of truth has learned the illusion of reality, and that substance is imposter. Except for lasagna.
A massive arc appeared before me. It shined a radiant light, and I knew this was the ultimate gate. Aware of my body again, I held out the silver key and felt my arm move it in a specific set of motions. I had unlocked it. My body then floated forward, into infinity, and through the ultimate gate. When I awoke again, I was shocked at what I was seeing. Before me was the anthill cities from my dreams. I was on the world of the normal. Panic struck me. I tried to run, fearing what might happen if I was discovered by the bizarre creatures, but my feet were no longer moving the way I expected them to. I mean, how could they? I had 8 of them. It didn't take long for me to understand that I was now occupying the body of the female normal scholar, the one that I had dreamt about. I could feel her consciousness fighting me, trying to push me out. But all of my studying had paid off, and through my meditations, I was able to fight her off. It was a quick solution to my problems. I knew her consciousness would return eventually and try to suppress me down to the depths of her mind. Using her lab, I eventually fashioned a drug using a concoction of normal flora that would keep her subdued so that I could continue to exist inside of her body. Still, I had much bigger things to worry about than an alien magician who wanted to regain control of the vessel I was currently occupying. I was missing the silver key, my ticket to return home. During my journey through the ultimate gate, I must have dropped it or lost it somewhere in the fabric of time and space. It could have been anywhere across the infinite planes of reality that I had traveled. Without it, I knew I was stuck on Nirmalth, inside an alien magician's body. I blended in as best I could with the creatures of Nirmals, periodically taking the drugs to prevent the original owner of my body from gaining control again. Their lifespans lasted for tens of thousands of years. I spent that time tracking down and researching every forbidden book on Nirmal's planet, hoping that I could find an alternative path home. I've licked so many growths off the back of those fleshy pink creatures that I have been able to absorb more knowledge than any human who has ever lived. And still I was unable to discover any way to return home. I studied the stars as well, and eventually was able to locate Earth's sun. It mocked me nearly every night as I stared up to the heavens, longing to return to it. And eventually, after thousands of years, my salvation came in the form of an apocalyptic event taking place on the Nirmothian homeworld. The planet's twin suns were unstable. Their scientists predicted that soon they would collide with each other, creating a supernova event that would wipe out all life in their solar system. Great arcs were built in the intention of jettisoning the survival Nirmothian to a new homeworld that was more suitable. It was here that I planned my escape. With the technology on these ships, I could not only return to Earth, but if my calculations were right, I could get back approximately about the same time that I had left. I boarded one of their great ships along with thousands of others and waited for us to take off into space. I had calculated my chances to execute my plan were slim, but I wanted nothing more than to get back to Earth. Shortly after taking off, I was able to kill a guard and commandeer an escape pod. I sent the pod on a course for home. For 1,000 years, I lived in a tiny pod as my ship soared through space. The loneliness was maddening. At times, I even thought about freeing the consciousness of the Nirmothian, whose body I occupied in order to have someone to converse with. But the risks were too great. My objective was to make it home, and there was no way I could put my goals in jeopardy by giving her a chance to take back her body, so I continued to take the drugs and perform my meditations to keep her at bay. 6 weeks ago, my ship entered Earth's solar system. The overwhelming feeling of joy surging through me when I saw the planet that I was born on filled my heart so much that I would have cried if Nirmothian physiology allowed it. The ship landed on the family farm in the late evening. This was sheer luck. I was able to program the destination with pinpoint accuracy, but I could have arrived at any point in the day. As fortune would have had it, I happened to touch down at a time that would draw the least attention. It was as though he were watching over me. The smell of Earth's air as I exited the ship was sweeter than I remembered. The sight of my family farm after so many millennia on that drab alien planet was almost heavenly. My body ached from being confined in the tiny pod for so long, and I knew I needed some rest. For days, I slept in the attic of my family home, leaving only to retrieve drugs from the pod or to hunt for nourishment. I killed mostly small animals. The processed human food I was able to find in the cupboards, like canned beans and potato chips, made my Nirmothian stomach turn. I was home, but my journey could not end here. If I stay on the farm in my current form, I'll eventually be discovered and likely killed. The humans are far more anxious creatures than the Nirmothian. There was also the problem of the Nirmothian magician. My supply of drugs is running low, and without them, I won't be able to fight off her consciousness forever. I must make my move, and make it soon. There's no more time to wait and strategize. I need to return to my body, or at least the body of another human. At this point, I don't care who. My plan wasn't fully formed, but my pen pal V told me that there were people who lived in the area that were well-versed in the Necronomicon, and I believed this was my key. I need to get the book from her first. It behooves me to own a copy, and if she's not willing to part with it, then I'll have to take it from her by force. I finally understand what these pinchers are good for now. I am John Arbuckle. I've lived for thousands of years. seen realities for what it truly is, and all I want to do now is to get back and live as the ignorant man I used to be. Unfortunately, that can't happen. My original body is gone, lost somewhere in the infinite realm of space-time, but maybe there's still a chance that I can die a man. Only he who guards the gate knows for sure. Inath lasagna sauceloth he igla ithrodag. We found the body naked, face down in the park, exactly where the college student said it would be. Pieces of bone stuck out the sides of the mouth like mandibles. The arms were twisted and broken to resemble antennae. Other body parts from a second body sewn on haphazardly, but also with the craftsmanship of a surgeon, were sticking out from the abdomen and waist, bent up to mimic the legs of a stick insect. The bottom half was just as grotesque, legs bent backwards with bones protruding the kneecaps and thighs, bits of teeth designed to replicate a hardened shell upon the man's back. Perhaps the worst part was that he had no skin. He had been stripped down to the muscle like a piece of meat. And then it was used as sort of a leathery exoskeleton for the torso to cover up the features. My partner excused himself to vomit the moment he saw the nightmarish abomination, but all that concerned me was the latest clue. Written in the victim's blood was the Latin name of the newest species to enter the collection. Andule viverendis, likely telling me that the deceased was a priest of some kind. This would make 5 in under 2 months that we had attempted to tackle, none of them solved, all of them related to the mysterious serial killer who left only these tags as a moniker. It was clear that his M.O. resonated with the most sickening deformations of the human body, and also a love for insects in general, thus why the media had assigned him such a casual name. But each time I came to one of those crime scenes, it felt more like a taunt. I'm a damn good detective. But this was the work of a true madman. So far, only 2 of the victims marched with missing persons in the tri-state county, which meant he was careful and meticulous. Our county profiler said that it was likely he studied his prey for months before choosing to attack. Because there was never a shred of blood that linked back to anyone outside of the crime scene, not a piece of skin, not even a hair follicle, this sicko was a ghost and he knew it. Now with bodies stitched together and put on display, he was getting bolder. It actually made me a little excited because a criminal that takes more and more risks is also prone to making mistakes. The ME showed up about 15 minutes later and confirmed this, with a quick swab around the bones that were sticking from the victim's jaws. "These aren't human," he said. What are they then?" I asked. "Afraid I'm not quite sure. Seem to be from some large dog, possibly a mastiff," he suggested. "Dogs like that are rare around here. There's a chance it belonged to someone. And if so, likely would have a tracker installed," I said excitedly. It was the first lead that we'd had. I tried to keep my spirits from soaring. I didn't want to jinx this into being a red herring. Sure enough, the next day the report came back and confirmed it. A man by the name of Julian West had owned the animal. "Looks like this fellow's a bit of a recluse," Joseph, my partner, commented after doing a quick internet search. According to the limited data he had dug up, Julian was a businessman from outside of New Orleans, one that had retired a few years back after an unfortunate accident. Now he rarely ever came out in public, and he lived in a more remote portion of the Louisiana bayou. We attempted to make contact several times that day with no result. Our only option was to drive out to speak with Mr. West and see what information he could provide. "We should go tonight, while this is still fresh," Joseph suggested. My date had already canceled for the night, so I obliged him, and we made the road trip in a little under an hour. When we finally did arrive, I felt a bit intimidated at the size of Mr. West's house. It reminded me of a southern Gothic, Downton Abbey, sprawling and dominating every part of the bayou around us. Joseph hopped out, and buzzed the front gate as I kept staring at the dimly lit windows. It was hard to believe that he lived here alone, but the entire place gave me the vibe of a haunted house. Once inside the vestibule, we moved up to the front door and I pressed the Ring doorbell before commenting. Well, at least we know he's not technologically impaired. The webcam activated before my partner could get a reply, and a sharp, hoarse voice asked, "Who is it?" "Detectives Arlington and Trent. We're here to ask you a couple of questions about your missing pet. It's concerning a homicide," I said, waving my badge at the camera. There was a short pause, and then the voice barked, "Come into my parlor!" The door creaked open to reveal a dusty and undisturbed hallway. Joseph took out his flashlight and illuminated our steps. "Kinda creepy," he admitted, as he walked into the wide foyer. Massive spiderwebs hung from the pillars. There was little to no sign of life anywhere. "I'll check upstairs. You take the first floor," I told him. He nodded, too freaked out to argue. I made my way to the top of the stairs. There was a portrait of Mr. West hanging there in what I assumed was the prime of his youth. He looked happy and content. Of course, it was hard to tell, since the majority of the painting was thrashed and scratched up like a wild animal had been set loose. "Have you ever heard the story of Dorian Gray?" a voice asked, breaking my reverie. It was coming from the nearby bedroom. There wasn't a speck of light as I approached the shadowy entrance. The voice added, "Please keep it dark. I'm not a fan of the light any longer. The accident scarred my corneas." I obliged him and stepped inside the room. Dorian Gray was a fictional character. He had a magical portrait. He kept him young forever as long as he didn't look at it, I said, answering his initial inquiry. "In some ways, I've sheltered myself here from the world for the same reason. I feel like if I were to expose myself, then the facade would make everything crumble," he rasped. "Is that what you hope to hide?" I asked. "I believe you suspect the answer to that, Detective. And now that I have you where I want you, why don't you see for yourself?" he remarked. I hesitated, a sense of foreboding overwhelming my body. But still I chose to raise the light up and peer at him. It was not the nightmare I expected, but it was something far worse. The man that was Julian West was gone. That much was clear in the faint light. In his place was an amalgamation of bodies sewn together to form a mixed-up Frankenstein-esque monster. He now had 4 arms emerging from his chest and twisted together to form a praying mantis-like pincers, and 6 separated legs protruding from his lower body, the way that a massive scorpion would. He even had the tail of such a creature, except that he seemed to be pieced together by the bones and tissues of other victims. "My God, man," I said in shock. He smiled broadly, showing his extra rows of teeth as he cackled. "You must know by now why I brought you here, if not to showcase my collection." I felt my feet fall from under me, like some kind of trapdoor was sprung. Then my hands and legs became entangled in a mess of silk and drool. It was another massive spiderweb, and below me, I saw a pile of corpses, except they weren't dead at all. These were more abominations that West had made in this dreadful hell, all shrieking and clamoring towards me, the way a shark would for a meal. I struggled to free myself, my firearm falling from my belt as I began to run. I scrambled up the side of the pit, using bits of bone that were sticking out to escape. One of the creatures latched on, its fangs piercing my neck as I flung it away and raced to the door. I shouted out to Joseph as West continued to cackle with glee. "You're too late now. These beautiful creations have already spread far beyond these walls. Soon all the world will be part of my display," he shouted madly. I tripped at the entrance, falling straight into the open cavity of my partner. 1,000,000 maggots burst from his skin, having devoured him in mere minutes, as I pushed back and fled in terror. I didn't stop running until I made it 10 miles down the road. And then I contacted my precinct captain to have a warrant for the house. Joseph's death was the nail in the coffin. We went to raid the house less than 3 hours later, but as we drove up, I saw amid the trees a glow of embers. The mansion was ablaze. It took another hour to douse the fire, and we initially found hundreds of massive, molting skins from the creatures. Guess he decided to end it after all, my captain told me. But I wasn't so sure because of something else I found amidst the wreckage. Or rather, what I realized was missing. The portrait. He was still out there somewhere. I scratched the back of my neck where the creature had bit me, and I winced. Then, amidst the burnt remains of Joseph's body, I saw that familiar tag the serial killer used. The upper portion of my partner was missing. It was ripped away like a prize would be by a toy crane. Another addition to the collection. Now, I'm unsure where I stand legally with this after signing an NDA, but those things only matter if you're alive, right? My name is Mac Haberstroh, and Mac is short for Mackenzie. I'm a freelance artist. I'm not a painter. In fact, my work revolves around dolls. I'm not fond of them as much as the next person. In fact, porcelain dolls scare me the most. Their lifeless eyes and dire fashion are outdated, and I can't help but associate them with horror movies. I often avoid working with them unless I'm desperate for a gig, but I must admit that doing their hair is more manageable than most dolls. Despite this, I spend most of my time working on anything but porcelain. I post my work on Facebook and Instagram, as they've been the best ways to reach clients. But when my niece, Laura, suggested I try and upload clips to TikTok, I saw an influx of interest in my handiwork. I was surprised to see how many people sat through a quick 1-minute clip of hair restoration or styling, and despite the negative stigma surrounding dolls, people loved it. Kids seemed to enjoy my guides, and I was thankful. In fact, Laura's suggestion was so helpful that I received a message requesting my phone number from the Disney in my business email, despite the address only being linked to my Facebook and Instagram. At 10:34 p.m. the following evening, I received a call. I was tempted to ignore the obnoxious buzzing from my mobile due to how late it was. My social battery was drained from a day putting on personalities for videos, and I had just selected a movie to watch, but when I answered, the mention of a hefty sum of money soon sent electricity through my veins, and I was awoken by the sheer motivator of cold, hard cash. Before I tell you about the job, I have to explain it a little. If you're not familiar with yarn, weirdly enough, it grows. Technically, it stretches over time. But when you put it on a doll, you may as well say it grows. And when the added wetness and humidity of places, such as the Disney's It's a Small World ride, the doll's hair booms. Since yarn has a very high chance of splitting, you can't just hire anybody to cut the hair. It needs to be somebody with experience, as it means that they'd have to pay another person to come and replant more. This is where I come in. When you download or sign up for something, do you read the terms of service? Because I don't. I probably should have read my contract past the first page, and maybe the NDA when I arrived in California. Over the phone, Mr. Darwin mentioned that I was able to take pictures for my portfolio. However, I was not allowed to live stream the process on Facebook or Instagram. Any knowledge of the workings of Disney was not allowed to be shared. Nothing surrounding live streaming on TikTok was mentioned verbally, but I wonder if the NDA had any information that may have warned me about the experience. After the brief meeting, a senior cast member named Luis led me to where I would be staying, which, from my understanding, was situated right in the park. Luis was pretty young, perhaps mid-20s, a year older than me. However, despite her young age, dark circles hidden poorly by makeup hung from her eyes, and her mousy blonde hair was thin and frail and hung in her face. She walked me around the park and showed me employee walls awarding long-serving cast members. A few awards belonged to Mr. Darwin, who worked for the park for over 15 years. "So you like dolls?" Luis asked timidly, as if she had forgotten her role for a minute. You could say that, but I mainly like doing the hair. I've always enjoyed it, even when I was little," I shrugged. "The girls in your family must love you." She smiled softly. Soon enough, she closed the distance between us. I grew up with my dad, and he didn't know how to tie hair. She sighed, her voice hardly audible over both adults' and children's joyous screams. What about your mom or sisters? I asked, afraid to overstep my boundaries. My mom passed away when I was super little. My dad's side of the family didn't really have many female relatives. I gave Louise a small smile, unsure what to say, and ultimately decided to change the topic. Who previously did the doll's hair? I asked, just as Louise showed me how to open my room door. I thought that a place like Disney would have a permanent guy for that. The question must have surprised her because she fumbled with my card and a red light flickered above the handle. Never met her. Her need to avoid eye contact made it very obvious she was lying. I found it peculiar that Disney didn't have a specific person for the role. I asked Mr. Darwin on the phone when I first called, but he just told me that she transferred to Treasured Staff Department, but I was hoping to speak with her about how the dolls are usually treated. Louise tried the sensor again, and this time we were greeted with the clink of a door unlocking and a green light. You should try asking him then. I didn't speak to her much. Is there anything else you need? She asked, and I shook my head no. The room was like a studio apartment. Open plan, with the only walled-off area being the bathroom. It was cozy, and a kitchen meant I can cook rather than fattening myself up on expensive attraction food. Sat on the kitchen island was an elegant but aged file on all the dolls, and a small toolbox. Every single page had been laminated, but it was clear they were once left bare by the crinkles on each sheet. There was one page specifically that was aged the most and stained with purple-brown ink. The page attached to the document seemed to have been taped on, while the others must have been glued. The image was a pretty blonde doll, dressed in aged attire with a small white apron. The sheet listed her usual hair length and sign-off sheets for when the hair had been cut and replaced. But unlike other dolls, Belladonna had managed to keep her original yarn from 2005. Despite not being the oldest of dolls, her page had definitely been loved. In the toolkit were scissors, tonics, and cotton buds to care for the dolls. Although the hair was my forte, they requested I also clean the doll's eyes and any dirt spots or mold that may have gathered since the last time of care. Mr. Darwin requests that you enjoy your free time until this evening when the park's closed. Louise smiled. We like to keep our rides operable during the day and avoid disturbing the magic for the guests while on rides. The last thing they'd want to see is you working on the dolls. I'll be back to guide you this evening. And with that, she left. With Louise gone, I took the time to study each doll. Almost all of them had the same care pattern, and honestly, trimming yarn was something I'd done for decades. A few dolls with sticky notes on their pages needed particular things, such as restyling, and these dolls moved a lot more, and their hair often came loose. And a few had needed more hair planted in. When evening came, Louise guided me over to the ride. The incredibly catchy tune still played and got louder as we approached. She took me through the back entrance, which allowed me to access the dolls from the back. Louise, I called just as she was leaving. Could you turn the music off? I asked, surprised that they went through the effort of emptying the water, but left the music running. I can't, she said flatly. Is there not a button? I can help you look. I don't know if I can work while it's playing, I insisted. I also wasn't sure if I'd get some sort of copying issue on TikTok. No, we're never turning the music off. It messes with the dolls. There was a slight pause. Mechanics. I'm not sure about the specifics, but many are old animatronics and the music plays a big part. But if you need to pause a doll while you're working on it, you just need to press their IMBs. Individual mechanism buttons. There was nothing too strange about the first evening. I mean, I'd never been to Disneyland before, so I was completely unaware that the song's language had changed for each area. I managed to get over a dozen of the dolls preened and cleaned, meaning that I could move from the frozen North Pole section to Scandinavia. The few people that joined my stream enjoyed the process, and with my phone on the tripod, I was able to work efficiently. As expected, a majority of viewers had complained about the song, so much so that I had to pin a comment explaining that I can't turn it off. The strange thing was that some of the dolls had a weird goo at the top of their head, and some sort of brownish bonding agent hadn't mixed well with the humidity. I scanned the Scandinavian section for a moment and took in the details. From beautiful and traditional dresses to unique hats. It looked magical. I could tell which dolls had a lot of movement from the number of flyaway hairs. However, there was one doll that didn't remain static. In the distance, on top of a crescent moon in the air, sat 3 dolls. In the center, a blonde doll's head moved right to left on a loop, as if surveying the area. I had attempted to show the viewers, but I caught a looming Louise standing at the door of the section. "Miss Haberstrath?" Louise called out. She was no longer in her uniform, but her hair was still neatly tied back. She remained at the door to the attraction, almost like she refused to come in. I didn't blame her, though. One misstep and you'd probably fall. I pulled my phone down and looked towards Louise. I swallowed a fat glob of spit back down to my throat and replied with a strained, "Sorry to disturb you, but it's 3 a.m. I was told I had to guide you back to your room before I could clock out," she yawned. I gathered my gear in a rush, careful not to knock over anything on the set. Had she noticed? "No, Louise, I'm sorry. Let's go." The next night, I came prepared with earbuds designed for married couples to drown out their partner's snoring. But nothing could cancel out the cheery song. They were so useless that I ripped them at the beginning. The earbuds were better used as an expensive cotton swab. Great for those hard-to-hit spots. Once again, Louise watched me from the door for a few moments. "How many nights do you think it'll take you?" she asked curiously. This many dolls, it could be 2 weeks, maybe more," I shrugged. I used the dull pair of scissors to snip away the elastic band around the doll's hair. Louise allowed the tune to fill the silence for a couple of seconds before saying goodbye and leaving. I once again set up my phone. If the CIA wanted a new torture method, boy, do I have one for them. The tune to It's a Small World is endearing, for a short while, but it becomes increasingly annoying. Imagine just how much I wanted to rip my hair out after an hour. I was surprised that my viewers continued to increase. I talked to another doll and changed the angle to show the 3 dolls on the moon again. However, I was surprised to see the center one sat static again. "That's strange," I hummed. "Perhaps she needs repairs? I think it's one of the older dolls. She's pretty, though." I moved the phone to point to the other dolls and began work on another that needed a trim. Something as simple as a snip takes a lot of time, and you need to be careful. We'll have to look for a ladder tomorrow. Maybe we'll get a good view from up there. Nearing the night's end, I noticed the dull pair of scissors had gone missing. I had come across them on the track with some extreme-looking and a brilliant suggestion to use a torch. Embarrassed by my mistake and the idea that I may have dropped them while the earbuds were in, I grew extremely flustered. "Okay, you can't record in here, Mackenzie!" Louise sputtered in a panic. I almost dropped the scissors at her voice. "You can take pictures, but you need to delete that video." Although it was a demand, it seemed like she was regurgitating someone else's words. And like a child being scorned, I stuttered to speak. It's a live stream? End it now!" She was desperate. I quickly followed her words and closed the live. "Is it off?" I nodded. "You can't do that. They're shy." Louise glanced up at the moon, and her eyes changed for a split second before she let out a small chuckle, indicating that she was joking. "Hey, you head back. I need to close up." She smiled, and I obliged. "Don't worry. I won't tell them." Disney probably safety-checked the ride each morning, but I couldn't help but think of the scissors causing a crash or flinging into somebody's face. The fact that I could have killed somebody kept me up alongside the mass messages of an edited screenshot of the moon dolls. The most annoying part was that it was sent from many accounts. Stupid joke, but one freaky enough to make me not want to be in there alone. On further inspection, the middle doll had been staring at the camera, something its mechanism shouldn't have allowed it to do. I managed to sleep through the day. The warm sun illuminated the room softly and protected me from anything looming in the shadows, and allowed my overreactive brain to relax. I managed to wash up, feed myself, and play on my phone for a bit until there was a knock at my door. "Miss Haberstraw, I'm here to escort you." A male voice trickled in from the cracks beneath the door. I hesitated to answer and crept to the door. "Where's Louise?" I asked. "She transferred to another department," he informed, and I peeped through the spy hole. In front of the door was a young gentleman in his early 20s. Despite his age, he seemed confident in himself. It was weird since she didn't mention transferring. Maybe she forgot. Mr. Darwin asked me to escort you from now on. He beamed as if he knew I was looking at him, so I opened the door and he handed me the doll profile book. You left this last night. The walk to the ride felt shorter than ever. Michael and I got along swimmingly, and he shared stories of his little sister's fascination with dolls, which she had gotten from her older sister. I was wrong to be suspicious of him. Hey, Michael, do you know how to turn the music off? I tried. Oh, it doesn't turn off. The dolls have to stay active, which means the music stays on, he informed. The reply was similar to Luis's. I decided not to work on the moon dolls that session, as the middle one had disappeared. Maybe for repairs. Pushing my luck, I set up another stream and started by showing the new section to the viewers. Strange, none of them are moving today, I noticed. It was true. The music was playing, however the dolls were still, as if their IMBs had been pressed. I guess it makes it easier for me to work on them. Since it was an easier night, I was able to answer a few questions. I refused to disclose the location, but people quickly identified the dolls. How do you know which is which? A comment asked. Well, if you check their backs, there's a tag with a number on the back, I explained while moving to the next doll. I arrived at one which looked well kept and searched for the tag. Oh, this one doesn't have one. I showed the front of the doll to the camera. Her mousy blonde hair hung straight, but the strange brown goo had begun to seep from the scalp. She must have lost her tag. I took the time to clear the smelly goop and tied the hair back, careful not to ruin the yarn. Just as I was about to switch to another doll, I noticed the liquid had started to seep out of one of her eyes. I quickly wiped it with a cloth, turning the material a maroon color. Maybe it's some sort of wood glue or something? I swapped to another doll, which was dressed up as Alice from Alice in Wonderland, and pulled out the tag to show number 32. So if I search through my book for 32, it'll show me a reference. I grinned. I can't show you, though, or I'll get in trouble, but I bet you can guess who she's meant to look like. I learned from previous mistakes and stopped my streams before 3, which was good judgment because Michael appeared right on time. How's it going? He smiled. Peachy. Found one without a tag, though. Who do I report it to? I pointed out the doll to him. I'll look into it. Belladonna was back the next night, and dolls were back in motion. It seemed the further along I got, the lazier the dolls became. I couldn't help but wonder if mechanisms got burnt out after being on 24/7. Michael was able to get me a ladder, but he seemed to linger around, meaning I couldn't stream. I climbed up the ladder and placed my toolbox at the top. There was no room for the books, so it meant I had to climb down to double-check my work. Oh, did you find out what number the doll was? I tied its hair back, but I'm worried it has a certain style, I asked him, taking extra care to trim the yarn of the first doll while so high up. Michael hummed. I'm not sure. Do you want to come and check with me? I know where the ride plans are, he mentioned. Like right now? With my rising viewage, I didn't want to start my stream too late. Felt like I had people expecting me for once. When you're done with that. I took a look at Belladonna and pressed her IMB. Something clicked, and it allowed her head to move back and forth again. Although I hadn't worked on her yet, I didn't want to jam the mechanics for too long for fear of breaking her. Michael took me to a backroom area for the ride, somewhere I never expected to be. He rummaged around as if he knew what he should be looking for, but not where it was. I heard they keep an updated plan from the Imagineers somewhere. Every other ride I've worked on had one. They usually updated when there's changes. He shuffled around until he got to the last drawer. Oh? What is it? This one was last updated in 2006. Disappointment, alongside something else I couldn't pinpoint, coated his voice. I watched as he took out the previous plan and waited for him to examine them. Miss Haberstroth? What do you think about the ride? He asked. I mean, it's cute. I struggled to place an opinion on it. Kind of strange? I don't know. My older sister used to love this ride. When she turned 18, I remember she got a Disney pass that she could come and look at all the dolls. I raised a brow, feeling like I was in the wrong place. I was only like 8 at the time. Yeah? I replied. Let's head back. A lot of dolls aren't even on here, especially the new one. Did you check down the shirt for the tag? No, I guess I didn't check properly. For some reason, Michael kept hold of the ride plans and followed me out. We navigated towards the mystery doll across the ride, and I noticed a new tag hanging out of its shirt. Just as I went to reach it, a huge crash echoed throughout the tunnel. The sound of crashing metal sent both Michael and me jumping out of our skins. Michael screamed a few curse words, then quickly corrected himself. It seemed like he hadn't fully grasped the cast member personality just yet. Sorry, he apologized. We turned the slight corner together to see my toolbox on the ground. The ladder, however, was still in place. Guess I should be the one that's sorry. I should have taken that down with me. Unfortunately, bottles of cleaner and tonic had smashed across the tracks. I hopped down and tried to clear the bigger pieces while Michael grabbed a broom. I loaded the bigger chunks onto the now liquid-soaked piece of cloth, but a much smaller piece impaled my finger in the process. It didn't cause much harm, but I was a baby about pulling it out. When Michael came back, he helped me remove it, and I used the cloth to stop the bleeding while he retrieved the first aid kit. The liquid on the fabric stung and turned my blood a darker color. It wasn't one of the best ideas to use something soaked in cleaning fluid as gauze. When Michael came back, he took it upon himself to disinfect and bandage the wound. Despite everything, I was stuck staring at the cloth. Michael followed my gaze to the cloth and hissed under his breath. You lost a lot of blood? No, just a bit. Those big stains are from the dolls, I huffed. Why would the dolls bleed? He asked, confused. I mean, I'm not a doll expert, but it wasn't blood. It's a weird goop. It may have been glue or something, reacting with the rusty mechanisms. Now that I had said it out loud, it did sound stupid. Which dolls? He asked. Quite a few. The ones we were at had some. Michael grabbed the scissors off the ground and rushed over to the newly tagged doll. I scrambled behind him, desperate to keep up. What did she look like? He shook. She. The person before me. Luis. Michael rushed his words. His panic had started to infect me. She had almost brown hair, mousy blonde, dark circles, I don't know. I tripped over my words. Look at it. Although his voice was weak, his sentence was demanding, and I did as I was told. At first, it didn't make sense. The doll in front of me was frail-looking. Skinny, with less yarn than they give the rest. And sure, the hair color was the same, but that didn't mean anything. You're not suggesting... I trailed off. It was so ridiculous that I couldn't finish my sentence. Cleaning fluid has formaldehyde in it. Do you know what it's also used for? He asked. Scissors gripped hard in his hands, that his fingers were turning white. When I failed to answer, he did it for me. They embalm with it. It reacts with blood, too. It's even used in disinfectant wipes. I had caught on to part of his accusation even more now. But if it was embalmed, why would it leak? I don't know. Shitty job, maybe? Michael raised the scissors, ready to stab into the doll, and I threw myself in front of him. Stop! This is stupid! You can't destroy it! You have no proof! Michael stopped, lowered his arm, and paused for a minute. He pulled the folded ride plans out of his pocket and opened it. Do you remember which dolls had the goo? Circle them. I stared at the plan for longer than I wanted. It took me a few moments to decipher it. Well, I can't, I admitted. They're not on there. Only the moon one is. Show me the page for it. Michael followed me back to the doll portfolio. It was already open to Belladonna's, ready for her fix-up. Hers. I handed him the book, which he took. I watched as a tan Michael turned pale as a sheet. His appearance became incredibly sickly, and his lack of reaction worried me. Finally, he shook out a breath and swallowed. He shakily handed me back the book and sat on the wet track. Michael began to sob into his knees aggressively, and once again I stood in fright of the strange man. It wasn't until I crouched down to his height to comfort him that I managed to hear what he was crying out. Donna. Donna, Donna, he sobbed. His voice cracked and his words broke from his tears. Donna? Bella, Donna? I asked, and he only sobbed harder. I couldn't get an explanation out of him for a long time. We sat on the tracks soaking our trousers in leftover bromine residue. I had no idea how to deal with somebody so unbelievably upset that all I could do was take the scissors off of him, drop them, and wait. When he finally calmed down, he glanced up at the doll on the moon, returning the stare. Pinpricks of fear stabbed my body as I locked eyes with her. But she didn't move. My sister, Donna, she went missing. My parents never told me what happened, but I became obsessed with her disappearance a few years back. The police never figured it out. She apparently checked out of the park, so it wasn't the park's responsibility. I felt uncomfortable, but heard him out. They think they found her body, but her face was mangled. Her eyes, teeth, and fingertips were missing, but it had her bracelet. My parents couldn't confirm it was her, but we buried it anyway. I wrapped my arm around him and pulled him into an embrace. His wet cheeks pressed against mine. Belladonna is what a cast member used to call her. I rewatched old home videos recently. He wasn't too old, maybe had a few years on her, probably was my age. Pretty Donna. I watched Michael stand up and head to the ladders. His shaky frame climbed it towards the doll. I didn't have the heart to stop him. He ripped it from its frame and carried it down. Brown goo leaked from its eyes, but it remained completely static. Mom and Dad always said you'd go after anyone who gave you attention. You were born to be adored, he whispered as he wiped her eyes with his sleeve. In an unexpected feat, Michael, who had grabbed the scissors off the floor, stabbed the doll's face. Brown sludge dripped from the hole, and whitish stones fell to the ground alongside it. Teeth. All around us, the dolls began to leak, their bodies motionless. The music stopped. This was her favorite ride, he sobbed, and embraced the doll, staining his uniform with liquid. I watched as he mourned for a long time. The relief of finding out what happened to his sister, but the pain of losing her again had reopened wounds that once healed. Michael and I both left in my car. However, my phone won't stop ringing. I blocked Mr. Darwin's phone number, but I keep getting calls from random and unknown numbers. Michael told me not to answer. I was hired by Disney to cut the hair of the It's a Small World dolls because their hair grows yearly. And now, I fear that my life is in danger. The whole room smelled of popcorn. Not just any popcorn, but the aroma of buttery, golden-popped popcorn from the movie theater. I spent $3.50 on it at the store, so it better taste like the movie theater version. To go with it, there was a box of wine on the coffee table with a glass already filled in my hand. I'd never tried this brand before, so the fridge had a 12-pack of my favorite seltzers, if the wine didn't cut it. The TV remote was in my other hand, and I used it to turn on the latest season of Dramatic Doctors. The flashback of last season had just finished whenever my doorbell chimed. I groaned before hopping off the couch, slipping on my house shoes, and heading towards the front door. I took a sip of the wine still in my hand and unlocked the door. A man stood on my doorstep with a casserole dish and a big grin when I opened it. "Hi," he greeted. "Hello?" "I brought you some green bean casserole as a welcome to the neighborhood." He held the dish up a little higher as he announced it, angling it towards me so I could somewhat see the crunchy top coat under the makeshift saran wrap lid. "Isn't that a dish for, I don't know, Thanksgiving and Christmas?" I asked as I swished around my wine. "Well, I guess," he responded as he stared down into the casserole. "My family kind of makes it year-round." "Well, my family doesn't," I responded. I tried not to make it sound cold, but I'm not sure I hit the mark based on the sad puppy dog face he gave me. "But thanks anyway." I began to close the door until he yelled, "Wait!" I opened it back up a little, just enough to lean my head and right shoulder outside. Yes, I said. I made it for you, he said, slightly disappointed. I sighed. I put my glass on the table beside the door and grabbed the dish. Thanks, I responded, before quickly shutting the door. I stood there for a few minutes before leaving the entrance, peeking through the curtain to watch his timid retreat. He had a somewhat confused expression, and I couldn't blame him. I just don't like people, honestly. They give me anxiety. I avoid them when I can. So much so that I even have a remote job that I made sure I could mostly use email correspondence. As I saw my front gate swing closed, I let out a breath of relief, picking up the dish and my wine glass. I debated whether a plate was needed or if I could just grab a fork. I shrugged, and I headed toward the kitchen to fish the utensil out of the silverware drawer. I made my way back to my perch on the couch before digging in. I was half an hour into an episode whenever I heard a knock at my door. Oh, for crying out loud, I whisper-shouted. I stood up from the couch, wiped the casserole and popcorn crumbs off my shirt, and scurried towards the front door once more. I honestly expected to see the sad puppy dog dude standing there, but that wasn't what I opened my door to. What I opened my door to was a simple music box. It was a tiny little thing, with an even more delicate-looking ballerina attached to its top. She held a pinch pose, with legs straight in the air. Intricate yellow and purple flowers decorated her pink tutu, their vines twirling around her slender legs, in a sky-blue box. Inside said box, once you lifted up the lid that the ballerina stood upon, there were tiny little trinkets such as children's costume jewelry, coins from random countries, and the sentence, "To my little ballerina, I will always love you," inscribed on the box's back interior wall. I twisted the little copper knob on the bottom and listened to the beautiful notes as the ballerina spun on her stage. The twinkling notes were rather lovely to listen to, but I couldn't stop wondering why the man would come back just to leave a random music box. As I was just deciding to hunt down his house tomorrow to redeliver the gift and his empty casserole dish, the thing was yanked from my hands. It smashed down onto my porch in the same position I had retrieved it from, shockingly unharmed. I backed away in confusion, my now empty hands lifting up a bit in a defense position. As suddenly as the music box had been stolen from my grip, my front door slammed shut, missing my face and hands by mere centimeters. Its forceful close had unleashed a gust of wind that pricked up the hairs on my arms. I backed away slowly from the door. I jerked my head to the right as my TV began to change on its own. The doctors, witnessing a drama that they had never faced before as nurses, started attacking them. A doctor ran to the screen full force, her face contorted in fear as she attempted to flee. A shriek tore from her lips as someone from behind repeatedly stabbed her in the jugular with a syringe. The last sound emanated from her lips were the words, "Run, Gabby," before she began to choke on blood escaping from her lips and slumped to the ground and out of view. My mouth opened wide at her mentioning my name. It remained agape as the television turned itself off. I ran to my kitchen behind me and I grabbed the knife from my chopping block as I heard childlike giggles coming from all around me. I didn't think a knife would do much good at whatever was happening, but better safe than sorry. However, before I could figure out an escape plan, I began to feel kicks and shoves coming from all directions as the giggles increased. Tugs at my hair combined with the hits as I was slowly backed into a corner. "I want to play with you," the strange voice. It echoed throughout the room and sent a chill down my spine. "Leave me alone," I screamed as the giggles overwhelmed my ears. The giggles suddenly stopped and were replaced by an aggravated roar as my head was forcefully shoved against the wall behind me, and I instantly blacked out. I sat up on my couch, covering my eyes, as the morning sun glared at me through the blinds. My empty wine glass rested beside my thigh, having somehow missed my couch cushions and spilled all over my white rug. I sighed in aggravation as I placed the glass on my coffee table. Accidentally knocking the TV remote onto the rug, I glanced up at said TV to see it asking me whether or not I was still watching Dramatic Doctors. I ignored it and picked up the remote before pressing the off button. My head was pounding. It felt like there was an incredible amount of pressure within it. Like I could take a pin and pop my head like a balloon for some relief. As I hopped off the couch, I headed towards the kitchen. I grabbed some pain medication from my medicine stash on the windowsill above my sink before grabbing a water bottle. Looking out into my backyard, I took some ibuprofen as I watched some squirrels chasing each other on the grass. My stomach rumbled, announcing that I was hungry, and I glanced at my counter to see the discarded casserole dish from last night. Must have drank too much, I thought. I forgot I'd even brought this in here. I picked up a few of the crunchy onions from the top and absent-mindedly ate them, thinking about how I would find the man's house to return his dish. At this moment, I remembered the horrible nightmare with the music box. The doctor's painful expression filled my mind, instantly making me lose my appetite. I turned around to face my island, and my heart dropped in my stomach as I saw a knife missing from the chopping block. Without thinking if possible murderers or demons were present, I instantly began to dart around my house searching for the makeshift weapon. I looked under couch pillows, cushions, even under the couch itself. I looked at nooks and crannies and every crevice in my house, but the knife remained hidden. My brain began to make up scenarios to compensate for what I couldn't make sense of, but I knew it wasn't just a dream when I touched the back of my head and winced at how sore it was. I decided I couldn't stay in that house any longer, so I got dressed, I grabbed the casserole dish, and I headed out the door. I looked all around my yard for the mysterious music box, but just like the knife, it was nowhere to be seen. I allowed myself a moment to admire the dried autumn leaves falling from the trees in my yard and the cool breeze on my arms before heading through my gate and out into the rest of the neighborhood. I walked down the road slowly as I surveyed my surroundings. It didn't take long to find my target, though. I saw him playing Wii Sports through his front window. I knocked on his door just as his me hit a home run. "Well, howdy, neighbor," he greeted me enthusiastically. I handed him the half-eaten casserole dish. "Could have finished it before you brought it back," he said. "I made it just for you." Yeah, I said, half listening. "Can you tell me a little about this neighborhood?" "Well, you're in luck," he started. "I'm about to walk my dog, so I could just show you." He walked down the walkway in front of his house, following his leashed golden retriever. The dog made a right turn out of instinct, and I followed him and his owner. "By the way," stated the man, "you never let me introduce myself last night. My name is Jonah." "Gabby," I said, returning the favor. "Nice to meet you, Gabby," he said, before pointing at a house across the street from us. "That's the Johnsons. They're a really nice family, husband and wife, 2 daughters who are both in high school. Real good people." He pointed at another house beside him. "That's the Rivieras. They're hardly ever home, really. They go on a lot of vacations." We slowly walked down our street as he explained who lived in each house with a short explanation of their lives. Our last stop was a 2-story that lived at the very end. The road in front of it a cul-de-sac. The house gave off an aura of gloom, despair, and darkness. It was a big and brooding thing with boards nailed over most of its windows. But I couldn't tell you whether it was to keep outsiders from looking in, or to keep what was in from coming out. I could tell you that the mere sight had put me on edge, and caused a trail of goosebumps to spring upon my limbs. It had a jungle of a yard full of weeds that were en route to dominating the porch after having already conquered the concrete walkway. That, combined with the stack of mail sitting in front of the front door and water falling out of the letter slot, led me to believe that the house's uncomfortable exterior were due to abandonment. "That place looks rough," I announced. Jonah's dog began to whimper as we stopped in front of the beastly house. It wouldn't stop until Jonah was kneeling down beside it with the animal's head burrowed under one arm like it was trying to hide from the house. "That house," started Jonah, "is the McFarlane house. Well, I jokingly call it the little ballerina house." "Ballerina?" I asked, as images of the music box flashed through my mind. "Yeah, a little girl who lived there took dance classes every week," he explained. "I remember her dancing around their driveway in her little tutu all the way to the car," he said with a slight chuckle as he reminisced. "She was a sweet little thing." "Was?" His expression became a touch darker before he responded. Yeah, it was. Her father was deployed whenever the accident happened. Something along the lines of her climbing a tree in her backyard while her mother was inside, and she was all the way up at the top and, fell. Hit her head pretty hard. And, she never woke up. Wow, I said. It was the only response I could come up with for such a short, sad story. Yeah. Dad took it pretty hard, I heard. He explained more as he stood up from the ground. The dog didn't seem to be too fond of this movement, but I noticed that Jonah had a habit of talking with his hands that couldn't be stifled. According to the neighbors, that's what ended their marriage. But you never know. You know, the full story. You go directly to the source. You know? I nodded as I kept listening. But I do know she moved out less than a year after her death, he continued. I remember the day because it was the same day the windows got boarded up. And no one knows what happened to the husband. Some think he got deployed somewhere else. The house has never been sold. So there's some other rumors that he just holed himself up in there. It's so sad, I responded. I debated telling Jonah about my dream, but I was scared that he would think I was insane. The words felt like they were itching to come out of my mouth, though. Yeah, it really is, he agreed. For a split second after that, I could have sworn I saw a small figure dart from one of the house's upper windows that hadn't been boarded up. Is that a sign from the house that I should tell him, or was I actually losing my mind? Why did he leave that one window alone? I asked. I'm not sure, honestly. Neighbors say it might have been her window, but I've never seen anyone in it. I saw her, I blurted out without thinking. What? He asked, confused. Well, not really her, I said. I think it was her music box? I'm not sure. It had a ballerina on it, though. What in the world are you talking about? His face was full of bewilderment. I couldn't tell for sure, but I felt like I could see a tinge of fear in his eyes. I had a dream last night about her, I explained. He opened his mouth, but I butted into him to explain more before he could tell me that I was out of my mind. Well, it was... I can't exactly piece all of last night together, but I had what I thought was a dream. A music box showed up at my door with a ballerina, and weird stuff started to happen when I played it, like something attacking me that wasn't there. Uh-huh, he said, face scrunched up in confusion still. I know you probably think I'm crazy, but I promise I'm not. I don't think it was a dream because I grabbed a knife out of my chopping block to use for protection, and now I can't find it in my house. And at the end of the dream, something shoved me down and I landed on the back of my head, and I can feel a sore spot where I landed. So, was it a dream? Or wasn't it? He asked. I'm not quite sure, I admitted while staring at the house. But how strange is it that I had a dream thing about a ballerina and there was a child laughing? Actually, now that I remember it. Did you watch any scary movies last night? No. But there was a really weird episode of Dramatic Doctors. I think the ballerina did that too. You do realize you're not making a lot of sense, right? He asked me, but his dog began to whimper again before I could respond. He bent down and began to rub the dog on its head. Yeah, let's get you home, buddy, he said to it. He walked back to his house and stood on his porch while he let the golden back inside. Just come to my house tonight. I'll explain it better, I said. He nodded and said, I'll bring another casserole, before heading inside. And bring one he did. I don't know if the timing was intentional, but I heard my doorbell ring at precisely 5 p.m. This time, with a potato casserole waiting for me. The cheesy dish smelled heavenly, and was much needed after the last few hours I spent practically destroying my house, searching for the knife. I still hadn't found it, leaving me absolutely dumbfounded. Instead of eyeing the monstrosity, Jonah immediately told me to sit down on the couch and headed for the kitchen. A few minutes later, after I had started up a new episode of Dramatic Doctors, he brought me a plate of casserole and a beverage. "So, what's up with all this crazy ballerina stuff you talked about earlier?" he said before blowing on a forkful of steaming hot casserole. "I swear it's not crazy," I began explaining. "And I don't think it was a dream either because I can't find the knife. I've been looking for it all day." "Ah, okay. That's why your house looks the way it does," he decided before popping the bite of casserole in his mouth. "Yeah, I kind of went overboard," I admitted. "But it's driving me crazy that I can't find it because that means everything that happened last night must be true." "Okay, tell me exactly what happened last night." I sighed before pausing the TV show and placing my plate on the table. "I can't believe I'm telling you this," I admitted. "I don't normally socialize, but I feel like I'm going to lose my mind if somebody doesn't believe me." "Oh, I can tell you don't socialize." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Well, I can't believe I'm telling you this, but you don't really have good conversational skills," he admitted. I stared at him, waiting for him to explain more. "You're literally proving my point right now," was all he said. And he got an eye roll as a response. "Just tell me what happened," he said, before taking a sip of his drink. So I explained. I explained every last detail of last night down to the bloody battle featured on Dramatic Doctors. I tried to show on the strange episode, but it had apparently disappeared from the streaming platform altogether. "You know this doesn't make your argument strong, right?" Yeah, I responded, unable to hide my annoyance as I flipped through the movie selection to find something to watch. "But I swear I'm not lying." "I don't think you're lying, but I don't know, Gabby," he said with a shrug. "I mean, there could be a million explanations." The sound of him slurping on his drink sent me into an even deeper aggravation, so I just didn't respond. I pressed play on a movie called Zombie Slayer before picking up my plate to dig in once more. "Ding," called out my doorbell. It was heard in my dream, but I didn't budge from my position on the couch. It rang a few more times in quick succession, which woke me. My eyes shot to Jonah just as he woke up and met mine. He rubbed the sleep out of his eyes while yawning, jumping at the doorbell ring once more. I slowly got up from the couch while making a shh motion with my finger to my lips. I watched him roll his eyes before I began creeping towards the door. Before opening it, I grabbed the vase sitting on my table by the door, ready to bash any possible threat in the head, whether they were wearing a tutu or not. I lifted my arm while ignoring Jonah's pleas for me to calm down, prepared for the worst. In one quick motion, I flung open the door to see no one. Not even a music box. "There are kids in the neighborhood that like to play ding-dong ditch." His voice was a possible explanation. "I've been ditched many times before." "I'm not so sure about that," I said. I peeked my head out of the door and glanced around my porch and yard. I didn't see anything, though, only the final rays of the day's sunlight. As I turned towards the couch, I accidentally bumped the vase against the table beside me. I quickly caught it, but the coating was too slick for my sweaty hands. It slipped from my hands and a loud bang came from the back door, causing us to jump. A cacophony of amused guffaws surrounded us, sounding like a demented kid in a candy store. Jonah jumped up from the couch and stood beside me. He tried to speak to me, but I couldn't understand what he was saying over how loud the laughter was. It became so powerful that I felt my eardrums would burst at any second, and I fell to my knees while covering my ears. I ground my teeth as sounds of glass breaking were heard from the kitchen. The uproarious laughter became breathless, becoming too uncontrollable. Plates began flying down the hallways, landing in piles of broken bits just before us. I looked up from my perch on the ground and saw an angry expression overtaking Jonah's face. He was about to head that way and follow the bait, but I grabbed his arm to stop him. As we were both looking towards the kitchen doorway, a knife flew towards me at a speed I could barely comprehend. It whizzed by my head, missing it by merely millimeters. The breath caught in my lungs, released at that moment, making me cough incredibly hard, and realizing I had forgotten to breathe. My eyes widened as I looked at the knife stuck in the wall behind me and realized it was my missing one. More sounds of dishes breaking continued to be heard, but the laughter had begun to die down, sputtering into robotic chunks. "What do you want?" I asked, voice shaking. The deep silence filled the house. No more sounds of glass breaking or laughter were heard, and it became so quiet I could hear a pin drop. He stayed frozen, standing between the doorway outside and my staircase. I debated latching onto Jonah's arm and dragging him out the door, but I was too afraid to move. A shift in the air sent me even more on edge, and I stepped backwards just a bit. A moment after I did, the cause of the change was before me and had flung me into the front door. A vicious grip was now around my throat, choking me as I was lifted off the ground. A crackling was heard around the house as all the light bulbs blew, leaving us in complete darkness, minus the dull glow from the TV. I couldn't see my attacker, but I could smell rotting death.
"I want you,"
roared the figure. The windows in my living room and dining room were flung open so hard the glass had shattered, and I began to hear panicked screams coming from Jonah as another dark figure dashed past the window. Childish giggles floated through the window as the figure darted back and forth, running through the chirping cicadas. The grip on my throat was released, and I had a moment to breathe before the door behind me was opened. I fell flat on my back, knocking the rest of the air out of me. I heard the screams become more intense in front of me as I was dragged off my front porch and down the walkway, kicking and screaming down the street as the overhead lamps illuminated our struggle. The only reason I knew Jonah was being carried with me was his cries for help. I tried to grab my captor's hands, but my hands were slapped away. I gave up trying as my shirt began to rise. I tried my best to hold it down, but the thin fabric tore from the amount of friction that it was being dealt. My skin was rubbed raw as I was dragged down the blacktop. I felt like it was being ripped off of my body in a stringy, disgusting mess, but I wasn't sure if that was possible. Our protests of pain did nothing to deter our captors. I'm not sure why I saw no lights being turned on and windows or front doors opening, but it made me feel like we were the only ones in the world. It felt like an eternity before we made it to the house. Pain racked my spine even more as I felt grass, weeds, and rocks being burrowed in as I was pulled up the yard. My head bounced off the porch's wooden steps as we entered the premise, and I released a sigh of relief as I was discarded onto the floor like roadkill. However, my relief did not last long as I heard Jonah's screams begin once more. A dark figure was leaning over him as it repeatedly stabbed him in the neck, reminding me heavily of the doctor from the TV show's Death. Jonah's screams bounced off the walls and echoed through the room. Blood spurted from his body upon each impact as my eyes fluttered shut, and defeat took over my body. Everything was black for a while. The squeaking of a rusty wheel turning is what awakened me. I attempted to rub my head only to realize my hands were burning intensely. I slowly and painfully lifted one up a few inches from my face, the dark making it difficult to see, and I cried out in horror when I noticed a hook piercing through the middle of my palm. Wires were connected to the hook, and I realized the noise of the turning wheel was coming from me each time I moved my arms. As the strings began lifting me, I shrieked in pain, and the wheels screeched too as they were put to work. As I became suspended in the air, I realized my feet too had hooks. Burning pain seared through my limbs as I hung there. It was all I could focus on until I heard a sound that I recognized, a twinkling off in the distance. I did my best to look around me, but the lighting was too horrible. Moving my neck sent waves of agony through my body. I heard the sounds of wheeling once more, and I winced, waiting for the suffering to commence again. I soon realized it was coming from somewhere off in the distance. A figure was brought before me, which was hanging from hooks as well, and I recognized, far more than I wanted to, I was forced into an up-close and personal meeting with a monster that had killed Jacob. Plaster forced her gray, loose skin into a feral-looking smile, her teeth bared and exposed. Her cheeks had been remade with chicken wire formed into balls and covered in plaster, made so large that they covered her empty eye sockets a bit. A dusting of cherry-red dust decorated the flaky white patches that still clung to the exposed wire, and dramatic fake eyelashes were placed upon the remaining skin of her eyelids. They loosely draped over another section of her sockets, leaving a tiny area of the dark void showing. Her mannequined expression remained still, even as I heard her laughter. Her upper half slowly shifted towards me as a loud creaking noise met my ears. I just barely felt her tutu graze me when she was jerked back to where she had come from by her strings, her laughter quickly stifled. Now, Maddie dear, yelled her father. You know the point of these little treats is that you learn patience, sweetie. He spun me around to face a brick wall covered in all sorts of tools. Hammers, screwdrivers, saws, and more than I could name. The lighting was so dim that I couldn't tell if the devices had a coating of rust or dried blood, but I wasn't very hopeful that it was the former. I'm sorry, miss. What did you say your name was again? He asked me. He stared at me, waiting for a response that I couldn't give. I was absolutely frozen with fear. Gabby, right? I'll call you Gabriella. He walked towards me, grabbing the hook sunk into the flesh of my right palm and tugged on it. I swear I could practically feel the rust biting into me, scratching and tearing at the inner workings of my hand. Maddie just likes to play, he said, while looking into my frantic eyes. But her playthings never last long, so don't worry. He gave me a smile before slowly backing away and heading towards the exit. I tried my best to scream out, mumbled pleads bursting out of my mouth as I struggled to unfreeze my shocked body, but it was no use. He ignored me as he retreated and the door slammed behind him. As I heard her giggles emanating from behind me, I mumbled, begs for her to spare me. Maddie, no, I screamed. Her laughter mixed with the grinding rust sounded worse than nails on a chalkboard. She slowly lifted one arm, and more pain coursed through my body as I struggled to lift my arm to cover her first attack. My mouth fell open to let out a scream, only for the noise to die down in my throat once I realized the item in her hand wasn't a weapon, it was a mirror. She was showing me myself. What? I gasped, choking a bit of my words. What did you do to me? White makeup was caked onto my face. Bright red lipstick and rosy red cheeks decorated it more. With thick fake eyelashes sitting on my eyelids, I noticed dark brown stains all over my shirt, so I looked down and realized it wasn't even a shirt. It was bandages wrapped around my body with spots of brown scattered around it. I feared that the section covering my back had more than just spots. Tears began to well up in my eyes as I realized I looked like the live version of Maddie. Barely alive. But more than her. I wanted a new friend, she croaked out. Her voice sounded somewhat robotic yet scratchy, like it hadn't been used in a while. Randomized chirps mixed with her words as if she couldn't quite figure out what tone to give off. Someone like me. I'm not like you, I responded, the tears beginning to flow down my face. You will be, she promised. Time to play, she said before emitting another set of giggles. Before I could ask what that meant, huge stage lights suddenly illuminated the room, finally showing how horrible I looked. The despair on the outside of the house was nothing compared to the inside. There were holes so gaping in the room's hardwood floor that I couldn't see anything but darkness below. Similar holes in the walls gave me glimpses into other dark rooms. Peeling and yellowed wallpaper surrounded the rest of the still intact wall, barely hanging on by a thread in some places. Brown splatters dotted the paper's design, and I knew that wasn't rust. The door opened once more as Mr. McFarland stepped back in and announced, "It's time for dance classes, girls." What? I asked. My question was answered as I was jerked up higher into the air and violently rocked up and down repeatedly. Blood began to pour from my aching wounds as tears ran down my face. I began to scream as I heard another body being wheeled up next to me. And I saw that it was Jonah's corpse. His head was nearly decapitated from the attack, hanging only by a sliver of skin and tendons. It hopped up and down as his wires controlled him. Maddie jumped willingly and giddily beside us as flakes of plaster ran down from her body. She mimicked traditional ballerina poses as her dad yelled something I couldn't hear over the music. "Please stop," I begged. "Please!" I begged and screamed. until my voice gave out and I was ignored the whole time as dance class went on and on. I couldn't tell you when I left it. All I knew was 1 minute I heard a jarring mixture of Maddie's giggles and the Nutcracker being played on an out-of-tune piano, and then I didn't. Everything became blurred and distorted as a dim version of life surrounded me. My senses felt numb, and I felt like nothing but a placeholder in life. This felt nearly like a pit stop before my death. I'm not sure how long I was in that daze, but I came out of it when I felt strong hands in my arms. I jerked my dull stare up from the ground, and my sluggish brain speeding up as adrenaline filled my body. I prepared for another fight for my life, only to realize my attacker looked just as scared as I did. His lips moved, but I couldn't hear what he was saying at first. "What?" "I'm gonna get you out of here," he responded. I lifted his chest and saw a badge that read Officer Allen. I held up my arms as a reply, showing my hooked hands. I cried as he removed them, not only because of the pain, but also out of relief that it was over. "Where are they?" "They?" he asked with a confused tone. "The man and his daughter." "The man," he started. He shot himself when we got here." "And the ballerina?" "The doll's over there." He looked off somewhere in the room and grimaced. "Is she dead?" I asked. He didn't respond, though. He just gave me a sorrowful expression. They'd told me I'd been in there for 3 days. My wounds becoming so bad that I immediately got shipped to the nearest ICU by ambulance. 3 days of no sustenance or rest, as my brain felt like it was just slowly dying. The doctors didn't understand how I hadn't bled out. I hated the way that they looked at me like I was a specimen rather than a person. A psychologist came to check me out. She told me how strong I was to survive through all of that. She said the brain could do amazing things to combat trauma, and the trance I was in for those 3 days is proof of that. They also told me the ballerina had never been alive, even though I argued with them until I was blue in the face. The father had formed a doll with his daughter's rotting corpse. He tried to use plaster and chicken wire to maintain the decay. Most of the organs had been removed by him to prevent it from decaying more rapidly. I tried to explain how I knew there still had to be something in the ballerina that was alive, that it had attacked and interacted with me, but they told me that fear can do weird things to our perception of reality. I tried to make myself believe what they had said is true, to give myself some sense of security. But it still doesn't do much to help. The fact that she hangs above my bed every night, suspended and grinning a few inches from my face, doesn't help either. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta. I want to tell you thank you so much for watching today's video on YouTube or listening to today's episode of the podcast on the podcast, depending on where exactly you're listening or watching. If you're on YouTube, hey, I would very much appreciate it if you guys clicked the like on this video, if you guys left a comment of what your favorite story is, and if you guys hit that subscribe button. You can also hit the bell, but I don't know what that does, so I think it's broken still. But hey, it helps. And if you're on the podcast, I'd very much appreciate it if you hit subscribe on the podcast or like on the I don't know if you can like podcasts, but if you can, hey, that's something I'd appreciate. And of course, like always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who supports me at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. You guys, as always, are the main MVPs of this story of every night's story, and you guys help me keep the lights on here. So, without further ado, I want to give a very big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Stephanie Butler, Bobby Karman, Tonya Oran, Tristain Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, That One Guy, Lupita Galvan, That Creepy Chick, Tyler Fletcher, Rebecca Harper, MerkyMoo, Red Shadow Cat, Xavier the Cheyenne, Demyx, Shawn, Cadieu-baker, 6 Gay Rats in a Trench Coat, Turtleman, Rob Like Sharp Things, KhaosArts, Kryolinian, Milk and Miel, Zachary Graffius, Goreng Tramagasi, Maria Walker, Pain Gravy, Crazy Kid, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Aka Limchalk, Dirt Diver, Matt Bach, Jabbles Raz, Voice of Sand, Coffee Zombie, Matthew McNeese, Shelly J, Jeremy H, Raltazal, Ficomel, Nana, Nick Weaver, Deleted Account, Melted Lake, Tolly Sue, Guy Mara Ravenswood, William King, Darth Miver, Michael Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Nessie, Ronnie Hansen, Bardo Hawk 764, Lambda M98, Harley, Sashi Suzaku, Croconut 509, My Body Sounds Like Rice Krispies, Kaylee Ambrose, Suji Campbell, Frickin', Azarine Fox, Freddy Krueger, Nicholas Zaccardi, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiwi the Sloth, Tommy Green, Fester's Lampshade, Guy Harbor, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. As always, thank you guys so very, very much. Thank all of you who are in the description down below, and honestly, thank all of you that can give anything, even when it comes down to just $1. I appreciate you guys very, very much. I love all of you, and I love all of you out there who are listening, liking, subscribing, doing all that good jazz. Sweet dreams.